1 month after my daughter Jasmine's wedding, the photographer called me at 2 in the morning, and his voice was shaking so hard I could barely understand him. "Silas, you need to come to the studio right now. Do not tell Jasmine, do not tell your son-in-law, just get here." I asked him if someone was hurt, but he just said something worse had happened, something that was going to destroy my entire life if I did not see it with my own eyes. I hung up the phone and stared at the ceiling of my empty bedroom, listening to the silence of the large house I had built with my own hands 30 years ago. I did not know it then, but that phone call was the sound of my world fracturing. Before I continue this story, please let me know which city you are tuning in from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to fight a war to protect your family from a snake in the grass. My name is Silas Thorne, and I am 72 years old. For 40 years, I worked as an architect in Chicago, designing skyscrapers that scraped the belly of the clouds and restoring historic buildings that the city wanted to demolish. I know how to look at a structure and see the cracks in the foundation that nobody else sees. I know how to spot a load-bearing wall, and I know exactly where to place a charge to bring the whole thing down if it cannot be saved. But apparently, I did not know how to look at my own family. I did not see the cracks in the man my daughter married until it was almost too late. The wedding had cost me $100,000. It was a lavish affair at the Botanical Gardens, a fairy tale that Jasmine had dreamed of since she was a little girl with pigtails running around my drafting table. I paid for every flower, every bottle of champagne, and every plate of filet mignon. I did it gladly because I wanted to see her happy. Connor, her husband, stood at the altar looking like a prince in his bespoke tuxedo. He is a financial advisor. Handsome, smooth-talking, and charming, in that way that makes old ladies blush and business partners sign checks without reading the fine print. He is white and comes from a family that claims to have money but never seems to pay for dinner. I never cared about his race. I only cared that he treated my daughter with respect. On the wedding day, he shook my hand with a firm grip, looked me in the eye, and thanked me for raising such an incredible woman. He told me he would protect her with his life. I believed him. I was a fool. When Benny called me that night, I was still riding the high of that perfect day. Benny is the son of my old platoon leader from Vietnam. He is a good kid, a talented photographer who sees things others miss. If Benny was calling me at this hour, it was not a social call. I got dressed in the dark, putting on my heavy wool coat against the Chicago chill. I walked past the framed photo on the hallway table. It was a picture of me and Jasmine dancing at the reception. We looked so happy. I did not know that while we were dancing, the knife was already being sharpened. I drove my old Land Rover through the rain-slicked streets of the South Side. The wipers slapped a rhythm against the glass, a metronome counting down the seconds to the end of my piece. My mind raced. Had Connor cheated on her already? Had they found something in his background? I had run a basic background check. Of course, I am not naive, but it had come back clean. Connor seemed to be exactly who he said he was, a successful man with a bright future. The rain hammered on the roof of the car as I pulled up to Benny's studio in a converted warehouse district. The lights were on inside, blazing through the industrial windows. Benny met me at the door. He looked pale, his dreadlocks pulled back in a messy tie, and his eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. He did not offer me coffee. He did not ask how I was. He simply locked the door behind me and led me to his main workstation. The room smelled of chemical developer and stale pizza. 3 large monitors were glowing on his desk. "Sit down, Mr. Thorne," Benny said, pointing to the leather chair. I sat. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but I kept my face impassive. I have sat across from city council members who wanted to destroy my projects, and I never blinked. I was not going to blink now. Benny clicked his mouse. The center screen filled with a high-resolution image from the wedding reception. It was a beautiful, candid shot. Connor and Jasmine were sitting at the head table. The lighting was soft and romantic. Jasmine was laughing, her head thrown back in pure joy. Connor had his left arm wrapped around her shoulders, pulling her close. He was kissing her temple, his eyes closed in apparent devotion. It was the kind of picture that makes you believe in true love. "I do not understand, Benny," I said, my voice low. "This is a beautiful picture. Why did you drag me out of bed for this?" Benny did not speak. He just zoomed in. He moved the crop tool to the right side of the frame behind the happy couple. Behind them was a large floor-to-ceiling window that looked out over the garden. It was night, so the glass acted like a black mirror reflecting the scene inside the ballroom. Benny focused on the reflection of Connor's right hand. The hand that was not holding my daughter. The hand that was hidden under the tablecloth on his lap. In the reflection clearer than day, Connor was holding his smartphone. The screen was lit up. Because of the high-resolution camera Benny used, and the angle of the reflection, the text on the screen was legible. It was backward in the reflection, but Benny flipped the image digitally so I could read it. I leaned forward, squinting at the screen, my breath caught in my throat. It was a text message Connor was sending at the exact moment he was kissing my daughter's head. The recipient was saved in his phone as the shark. The message read, "Fish has bitten the hook. The old man will sign the transfer papers within 3 months. Start preparing the paperwork for the nursing home. I want him out of the house by Christmas." I read it once, then I read it again. The words seemed to float in the air, turning into physical blows that struck me in the chest. Fish has bitten the hook. I was the fish. Jasmine was the bait. And Connor was the fisherman holding the rod. I sat back in the chair, feeling the blood drain from my face. I felt cold, freezing cold, deep in my marrow. The nursing home. He was planning to put me in a home. Me. Silas Thorne. A man who still ran 5 miles a week and consulted on multi-million-dollar projects. He wanted me out of my house, the house I designed, the house where my wife Bernice and I had raised Jasmine, the house that held every memory of my life. Benny watched me, his hands hovering over the keyboard. "I am sorry, Mr. Thorne," he whispered. "I was editing the batch tonight and I saw the glare on the phone. I zoomed in just to see if I could remove the distraction, and then I read it. I did not know what to do. Should we call the police? Should we call Jasmine?" I raised my hand, stopping him. The room was silent except for the hum of the computer fans. I looked at the face of my son-in-law on the screen. That handsome patrician face, the face of a sociopath. He was not just after my money, he was planning to erase me. He was planning to take my legacy, my home, and my dignity and lock me away in some facility while he spent my fortune. And the worst part was that he was using my daughter's love as the weapon to do it. "If I tell Jasmine now," I said, my voice sounding like grinding gravel, "she will not believe it. She is in love, Benny. She will think it is a misunderstanding or a joke. Or worse, he will spin it. He will say he was talking about a client. He will say I am a paranoid old man spying on him. He will turn her against me." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the rain. The anger was there, boiling hot and dangerous, but I pushed it down. I pushed it into that cold, hard place where I kept my resolve. I had survived poverty, I had survived the death of my wife, and I had survived a business world that wanted to see a black man fail. I would survive Connor, but I would not just survive. I would teach him a lesson. "Do not delete that photo," I said, turning back to Benny. "Save it. Make 3 copies. Put one on a separate drive and give it to me. Put one in your cloud storage with a password only you know. And print one out large." Benny nodded rapidly. "What are you going to do, Mr. Thorne?" I looked at the screen one last time at the text message that called me an old man. I buttoned my coat. "I am going to go home, Benny. I am going to make coffee. And when Connor comes over for Sunday dinner tomorrow, I am going to hug him. I am going to shake his hand. And I am going to be exactly the frail, confused old man he thinks I am." "You are not going to tell him?" Benny asked. "No," I said, walking to the door. "If you see a snake in the grass, you do not yell at it. You wait until it slithers onto the rock, and then you cut off its head." I drove home in the rain, but the drive felt different. The fear was gone. In its place was a plan. Connor wanted a senile old man who would sign over his life. Fine. I would give him the best performance of my life. I would let him think he was winning. I would let him get close. I would let him think the hook was set deep in my jaw, and then when he least expected it, I would pull him into the deep water and drown him. I pulled into my driveway and looked at the dark windows of my house, my fortress. They thought they could take it from me. They thought I was just a resource to be harvested. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer. The house smelled of lemon polish and old wood. It smelled of safety, but the safety was an illusion now. The enemy was already inside the gates. I went to my study and opened the bottom drawer of my desk. I pulled out a small black notebook. I wrote down the date and the time. Then I wrote down exactly what I had seen on the screen. The shark, nursing home, Christmas. I closed the book and placed it back in the drawer. The war had started, and Connor had no idea that the fish he had hooked was actually a great white. Tomorrow the game would begin. I would need to check my bank accounts. I would need to call my lawyer Vance. But first, I had to survive Sunday dinner without strangling him with my bare hands. I went upstairs to bed, but I did not sleep. I lay there listening to the rain, plotting my first move. I needed to know who the shark was, and I needed to know how deep the rot went. Little did I know that what I found in the coming weeks would make that text message look like a nursery rhyme. This was just the tip of the iceberg. 2 weeks after that phone call with Benny, the front door opened and the hurricane came back into my house. Jasmine and Connor returned from their honeymoon in Bora Bora looking like a golden couple from a magazine cover. They were tanned, glowing, and smelled of expensive coconut oil and duty-free perfume. My daughter ran to me and threw her arms around my neck, burying her face in my shoulder. I held her tight, closing my eyes and breathing in the scent of her hair. It was the same smell she had when she was 6 years old and afraid of thunder. I wanted to tell her everything right then. I wanted to tell her that the man standing behind her with the perfect smile was a monster who called me a fish to be gutted. But I didn't. I held my tongue because I knew that truth without proof is just the rambling of a jealous old man. Connor stepped forward, extending his hand. His grip was firm, his palm dry. "Silas, you look tired," he said, his voice dripping with synthetic concern. "Have you been eating well while we were gone?" I did not miss the slight emphasis on the word tired. It was the first brushstroke in the painting he was creating. A portrait of me as a crumbling ruin. "I am fine, Connor," I said, letting a little tremor enter my voice. "Just missing the noise of the house. It gets quiet here at night." Connor nodded solemnly, looking at Jasmine. "We are back now, Dad. We are going to take care of everything." He reached into his bag. "We brought you something." He pulled out a walking cane. It was elegant, made of polished mahogany with a silver handle, but it was still a cane. "I have run 5 miles a week for the last 20 years. I can squat 300 pounds. I do not need a cane." But Connor was handing me a prop for the play he wanted to direct. "It is beautiful," I said, leaning my weight on it heavily. "My knees have been acting up lately." "Thank you, son." The look of satisfaction in his blue eyes lasted only a microsecond, but I saw it. He thought I was accepting my decline. He did not know I was accepting a weapon. Over the next few days, the house settled into a new rhythm. But it was a rhythm dictated by Connor. He was everywhere. He was in the kitchen organizing the pantry because he said my system was illogical. He was in the garage criticizing the maintenance of my Land Rover. He was slowly, subtly marking his territory. The first major attack happened on a Tuesday morning. I have a routine. I have had the same routine since 1985. I wake up at 6. I drink my coffee and I put my car keys in the ceramic bowl on the hallway table. It is muscle memory. It is a fundamental law of physics in my universe. The keys go in the bowl. I place them there as I always do. The distinct clatter of metal on ceramic rang out. I went into the kitchen to rinse my mug. When I came back 3 minutes later to head to the library, the bowl was empty. I blinked. I patted my pockets. I looked on the floor. Nothing. A cold knot formed in my stomach, not because I was confused, but because I knew exactly what was happening. I had read about this. Gaslighting, making a person question their own reality. I decided to play my part. I started opening drawers. I checked my coat pockets. I started muttering to myself, letting my voice rise in panic. Where are they? I just had them. Connor walked down the stairs, buttoning his cuffs. He looked fresh, sharp, and predatory. "What is wrong, Silas? You seem agitated." "My keys," I said, looking at him with wide, fearful eyes. "I put them in the bowl." "I swear I put them in the bowl, Connor. Now they are gone." He smiled a patient, condescending smile. "Are you sure, Silas? Maybe you left them in the kitchen or the bathroom. We forget things when we get stressed." "I did not put them in the bathroom," I insisted, making my hands shake. "I am not crazy. Let me help you look," he said, stepping down the final stair like a savior descending from the clouds. We searched for 10 minutes. I watched him pretend to look under the sofa cushions. I watched him check the coat rack. Finally, he walked into the kitchen. A moment later, he called out, "Silas, come here." I walked into the kitchen. Connor was standing by the refrigerator. He had the door open. There, sitting on the middle shelf next to a carton of milk, were my car keys. The metal was cold, frosted with condensation. "I did not put them there," I whispered. My voice sounded small even to my own ears. "Why would I put my keys in the fridge?" Connor put a hand on my shoulder. His touch was heavy. I do not know, Silas. But there they are. Maybe you came in to get milk and got confused. It happens. My grandmother started doing things like this right before we had to make arrangements. He let the sentence hang in the air. The implication was clear. This was the beginning of the end. Jasmine walked in at that moment. She saw the keys in the fridge. She saw me trembling. She saw her husband looking at me with deep pity. "Daddy," she said, her voice breaking, "did you put the keys in the fridge?" I looked at my daughter. I saw the fear in her eyes, the fear that her strong father was fading away. It broke my heart to see her scared, but I had to let her feel it. If she did not believe I was weak, she would never believe Connor was manipulating me. She had to see the play to understand the villain. I do not remember. I stammered, looking at my hands. I thought I put them in the bowl. I must have. I don't know what is happening to me. Connor hugged Jasmine, pulling her into his chest. He looked at me over her shoulder. His face was a mask of sympathy, but his eyes were dead cold. "Don't worry, Jasmine. I will keep an eye on him. We just need to make sure he is safe." Safe. That was his favorite word. That evening after dinner, Connor made his next move. We were sitting in the living room. Jasmine was reading, but casting worried glances at me every few minutes. I was staring at the fireplace, pretending to be lost in thought. Connor cleared his throat. "You know, Silas, I have been looking at your investment portfolio, the statements you left on your desk. I had left them there on purpose. They were older statements from a secondary account, not my main assets, but still substantial enough to whet a shark's appetite. I am not sure you should be managing all that complexity anymore," he said, swirling his brandy. "Especially after what happened with the keys today. One wrong click and you could lose a lot of money. Market volatility is high right now. As a financial advisor, I could take that burden off your shoulders. I can consolidate everything under my firm's management. It would be safer." I looked at him. He wanted the keys to the kingdom. "You are right, Connor," I said softly. "I get confused by the numbers lately. They dance on the page." "I will have the paperwork drawn up," he said quickly. Too quickly. "We can sign it later this week." Then he stood up and walked to the center of the room, looking around at the walls. "And this house. It is too big for you, Silas. Too many stairs. Too many shadows. And frankly, it is outdated. It is a hazard's trap." He turned to Jasmine. "Babe, I was thinking. Since we are living here now to take care of Dad, maybe we should make some changes. Modernize it. Open concept. Knock down these walls between the dining room and the study. Create a space where we can keep an eye on him better." My blood turned to ice. The study was my sanctuary. It was where I kept Bernice's ashes. It was where I designed my best buildings. The walls he wanted to knock down were load-bearing walls I had placed there with my own hands. He did not just want to renovate. He wanted to erase. He wanted to gut the house of its history and turn it into a sterile glass box that he could sell for a premium. Jasmine hesitated. "But that is Mom's favorite room, Connor. Dad loves that study." Connor sighed, the sound of a patient parent dealing with a difficult child. "I know, babe, but we have to prioritize safety over sentimentality now. Did you see him today? He put his keys in the fridge. Next time he might leave the gas on. We need open lines of sight. We need to control the environment. For his own good. For his own good." The phrase echoed in my head. I gripped the handle of the cane he had given me. I gripped it so hard my knuckles turned white. I wanted to stand up and tell him that I knew more about structural integrity than he would ever know. I wanted to tell him that if he touched one brick of my house, I would break his hands. But I forced myself to relax. I forced my shoulders to slump. I looked at Jasmine, who was waiting for my reaction. She wanted me to fight. I could see it. She wanted the old Silas to roar. But the old Silas was gone. The new Silas was a hunter waiting in the tall grass. "Whatever you think is best." "Children," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "I just want to be safe. I do not want to be a burden." Connor smiled. It was a victory smile. He thought he had broken the horse. He thought the ride was over. That night, lying in bed, I pulled up the app on my phone connected to the hidden camera I had installed in the hallway. I watched the recording of the morning. I saw myself put the keys in the bowl. I saw myself walk into the kitchen. Then I saw Connor. He walked to the bowl. He looked around. He picked up the keys. He walked to the kitchen. He opened the fridge. He placed them inside. He closed the door. He did a little fist pump, a tiny gesture of celebration. I saved the video. I backed it up to the cloud. I backed it up to a hard drive. You want to renovate my house, Connor? I whispered to the darkness. You want to knock down my walls? Go ahead. Swing your hammer. But you seem to have forgotten one thing about architecture. If you knock down the wrong wall, the roof does not fall on the house. It falls on you. I closed my eyes. The renovation was approved. The financial papers were coming. He was moving faster than I expected, but so was I. Tomorrow I would visit my lawyer. Tomorrow I would start building the cage that would trap this shark forever. The keys in the fridge were a nice trick, but I was about to show him a magic trick that would make him disappear. The invasion began on a rainy Tuesday morning with the screech of a moving truck's brakes against the wet asphalt of my driveway. I stood by the living room window, my hand resting on the cold glass, watching as two men in blue coveralls began to unload boxes. They were not just boxes. They were the building blocks of my replacement. Jasmine had told me that they were moving in to take care of me to ensure that I was safe and comfortable in my golden years. But as I watched Connor directing the movers with the imperious hand gestures of a traffic cop, I knew the truth. They were not moving in to care for the house. They were moving in to conquer it. My home, which had been a sanctuary of silence and memories for the 5 years since Bernice passed away, was suddenly filled with the chaotic noise of occupation. The sound of heavy boots on hardwood floors, the thud of furniture being dragged, and the sharp commands of my son-in-law echoed through the halls. I felt a tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with my heart condition and everything to do with the violation of my territory. Connor walked in carrying a sleek, modern espresso machine. He looked around the foyer, his eyes scanning the space, not with appreciation but with calculation. He was already redesigning the space in his head, erasing the history that lived in the crown molding and the wainscoting. "Put that over there," he shouted to a mover, pointing at the spot where Bernice's antique grandfather clock stood. "Be careful with that couch. It is Italian leather." I walked over, leaning heavily on the cane he had given me, playing the part of the frail old man. "That clock has stood there for 30 years, Connor," I said, my voice trembling slightly. Bernice loved the chime. Connor smiled, that tight, patronizing smile that never reached his eyes. "We are just rearranging a bit, Silas. Just to open up the flow. Feng shui, you know. It is better for the energy. And honestly, that clock is a bit loud, don't you think? It might disturb your rest?" He did not wait for an answer. He waved the movers forward. I watched as they shifted the clock, the heavy pendulum clanging in protest against the glass. I wanted to shout. I wanted to tell him that the clock was the heartbeat of this house, but I swallowed my rage. I let it burn in my stomach, fueling the fire that would eventually consume him. The real blow came 2 days later. I had gone out for a walk, a slow shuffle around the block to maintain my cover while actually meeting with a private investigator in a parked car 2 streets over. When I returned, the house was ominously quiet. Jasmine was at work. Connor's car was in the driveway. I walked toward my study. That room was sacred. It was where I had designed the skyline of this city. It was where I kept my drafting table, my awards, and most importantly, the small corner dedicated to Bernice. Her sewing machine was there, along with her favorite books and a collection of porcelain angels she had gathered over 40 years. I had not moved a single item since her funeral. It was a museum of our love. The door was open. I stepped inside and my breath caught in my throat. The room had been purged. My drafting table was pushed into a corner covered with a drop cloth. Bernice's sewing table was gone. The shelves that had held her books were now filled with Connor's financial binders and motivational trophies. The porcelain angels were missing. In the center of the room sat a massive modern glass desk with a dual-monitor computer setup. Connor was sitting there leaning back in an ergonomic chair, his feet up on the glass, talking loudly into a headset. "Sell the futures," he was saying. "I do not care about the projections, just dump it. We need liquidity." He saw me and ended the call. He spun around, grinning as if he had done me a favor. "Surprise," he said, spreading his arms. "I thought I would set up a proper home office. Since you do not do much architectural work anymore, I figured we could put this space to better use. I moved that old sewing junk to the attic. It was just gathering dust, Silas. You have to let go of the past." The attic. He had put my wife's soul in the attic. I gripped my cane so hard I thought the wood would snap. The urge to strike him was overwhelming. It was a physical need, a hunger in my muscles. But I remembered the text message. I remembered the plan. It looks very professional. Connor, I stammered, forcing my eyes to water. I miss her things. It is for the best. Silas, he said, walking over and patting my shoulder. Keeps the air cleaner, less clutter, good for your lungs. He walked out of the room, leaving me alone in the sterile, cold space that used to be my heart. I walked over to the corner where her sewing machine used to be. I touched the empty wall. I swore to her right then and there that I would make him pay for every angel he had touched. That afternoon, the war moved to a new front. I was in the living room, sitting in my favorite armchair with a blanket over my legs. I had learned that if I closed my eyes and breathed rhythmically, people assumed I was asleep. In our culture, we call it resting your eyes, but for me, it was tactical surveillance. Connor came into the room. I heard the soft tread of his loafers on the rug. He paused, waiting to see if I would move. I let my mouth hang open slightly and added a soft snoring sound to my breathing. A trick I learned in the army. Satisfied that the old man was out cold, Connor moved. He did not go to the kitchen. He did not go to the TV. He went straight to the wall behind the large oil painting of the harbor. My heart rate spiked, but I kept my breathing steady. Behind that painting was a wall safe, an old model heavy steel mechanical dial. I kept the combination in my head. I heard the painting being shifted, then silence, then the faint clicking of the dial. Left, right, left. He was trying combinations. He was guessing birthdays. Jasmine's birthday, my birthday, Bernice's death day. Click, click, click. I cracked one eye open, just a sliver beneath the cover of my lashes. Connor was sweating. His face was twisted in frustration. He was not just looking for cash, he was looking for deeds. He was looking for the power of attorney documents. He was looking for the keys to my kingdom. After 10 minutes of futile spinning, he hit the safe with the palm of his hand. "Damn it," he whispered. Then he did something that chilled me to the bone. He pulled a small stethoscope from his pocket. A stethoscope. He was not just guessing. He was trying to crack it like a professional thief. He placed the bell against the metal door, listening for the tumblers to drop. I had to stop him, but I could not wake up. If I woke up, he would know I saw him. So I did something else. I let out a loud snort, a sudden jerking movement of my arm as if I was having a dream. Connor froze. In one fluid motion, he slid the stethoscope into his pocket and swung the painting back into place. He spun around, his face composing itself into a mask of innocence. I blinked my eyes open, looking around groggily. "Jasmine," I mumbled, "is it dinner time?" Connor exhaled a long, shaky breath. "No, Silas," he said, his voice tight. "It is just me. Go back to sleep." I closed my eyes again, but I did not sleep. I lay there listening to him walk away, and I realized that I was dealing with a predator who was more desperate than I thought. He was not just greedy, he was under pressure. A man does not try to crack a safe in the middle of the afternoon unless he owes money to dangerous people. The next morning, I told Connor and Jasmine that I was going to the senior center for a bingo tournament. Connor practically pushed me out the door, eager to have the house to himself again. I drove 2 blocks and parked. Then I doubled back on foot, entering through the garden gate that I had oiled so it made no sound. I was not there to play bingo. I was there to fortify my position. I had a bag with me. Inside were 6 high-definition cameras disguised as smoke detectors and motion sensors. I had bought them with cash from a supplier Benny knew. They were undetectable, connected to a secure server that only I could access. I moved through my own house like a ghost. I installed one in the study directly facing the desk where Connor sat. I installed one in the living room focused on the safe. I installed one in the kitchen and one in the hallway. My hands, which Connor claimed were shaking from age, were steady and precise. I stripped wires, connected terminals, and mounted the devices with the speed of a man who had built skyscrapers. As I stood on the ladder in the study, screwing the final camera into the ceiling, I looked down at Connor's desk. I saw a notepad. On it, he had scribbled a list of numbers, estimates, not for renovation but for liquidation. He had listed the value of my vintage car, the value of the antique furniture, and an estimate for the house itself. He was selling me off piece by piece. I finished the installation and wiped away the drywall dust. I packed up my tools and slipped out the back door just as Jasmine's car pulled into the driveway for her lunch break. That night, lying in bed, I opened my tablet. The screen divided into 4 quadrants. I could see everything. I saw Connor pacing in the study. I saw him open a drawer and take out a flask, drinking heavily. I saw him pick up a picture of Jasmine and me and place it face down on the desk. I watched him, and for the first time in weeks I smiled. He thought he had invaded my territory. He thought he had taken my command center, but he had only walked into a panopticon. Every move he made, every number he dialed, every document he stole would now be recorded. He was living in a glass house, and he was the only one who didn't know that the walls were watching. I saw him pick up his phone. I adjusted the volume on my tablet. The microphone in the smoke detector was sensitive enough to pick up a whisper. "Yeah, I am working on it," he said into the phone. "The old man is clueless. I will have the combination soon. Just give me another week. Yeah, I know what happens if I do not pay." "I know." I closed the tablet. So that was it. Debt. He was drowning in debt, and I was his life raft. I looked at the ceiling where the real smoke detector blinked its red light. I whispered to the empty room, "You can try to crack the safe, Connor, but you are going to find that the only thing locked inside is your own destruction." I pulled the blanket up to my chin. The invasion was over. The occupation had begun, but the resistance was just getting started. And unlike him, I had the advantage of patience. I would let him dig his hole a little deeper. I would let him think he was the king of the castle until the moment I pulled the lever and dropped him into the dungeon. The Sunday roast tasted like ash in my mouth, not because Jasmine had overcooked it, but because I could taste the betrayal hanging in the air like cigar smoke. We were sitting at the mahogany dining table, the one I had carved by hand for our 10th wedding anniversary. Connor sat at the head of the table, a spot that had been mine for 40 years. He cut his meat with precise surgical movements, his knife scraping against the china with a sound that grated on my nerves. I watched him wipe the corner of his mouth with a linen napkin, and I knew the pitch was coming. I had seen him rehearsing it in the mirror earlier that day, thanks to the camera I had installed in the guest bathroom. Silas Connor began, his voice smooth and coated in that fake concern that made my skin crawl. "Jasmine and I have been talking. We are worried about you. This house is a masterpiece, we all know that, but it is becoming a prison for a man of your age. The stairs, the maintenance, the heating bills. It is too much burden for one person, especially someone whose memory is starting to slip." I saw Jasmine look down at her plate. She was not eating. Her hands were in her lap, twisting her napkin. She knew what was coming, and she felt guilty about it, but she had been coached. Connor had been working on her for weeks, whispering poison in her ear at night, telling her that I was a danger to myself, that the house was a death trap waiting to spring. I put my fork down, letting my hand tremble just enough to rattle the silverware against the plate. "What are you saying, Connor?" I asked, keeping my voice weak and confused. "I am saying that we found a solution," he said, leaning forward, his eyes gleaming with the reflection of the chandelier. The oblivious greed in his eyes was almost impressive. "There is a new development downtown, the Azure Towers. Luxury condos designed specifically for seniors, single-level, heated floors, on-call medical staff. And the best part is that the market is hot right now. If we sell this place, we can get you a penthouse there and still have plenty left over for your care." He did not say for your care. He meant for my debts. I knew exactly how much he owed to the loan sharks. I knew because I had hacked his email 3 days ago. He needed $1 million by the end of the year, or his legs were going to be broken. My house was his winning lottery ticket. I looked at Jasmine. "Honey, do you think I should leave our home?" She finally looked up, her eyes swimming with tears. "Daddy, it is not about leaving. It is about safety. Remember the keys in the fridge. Remember how you forgot the alarm code last week. Connor says that the Azure Towers has 24-hour security. You would be safe there, and we would come visit you every week. Every week." That was the sentence. That was the prison sentence. They would ship me off to a glorified waiting room for death and visit me once a week until I finally expired and they could inherit the rest. I looked around the room. I looked at the wainscoting I had installed myself. I looked at the crown molding where Bernice had once hung mistletoe. Every inch of this house was a chapter of my life. Selling it was not just a transaction, it was an amputation. But I could not say no. If I said no, Connor would push for a competency hearing. He would bring up the keys. He would bring up the fake medical report. He would have me declared unfit and sell the house anyway. I had to outsmart him. I had to give him what he wanted, but on my terms. I let out a long sigh, my shoulders slumping in defeat. "Maybe you are right," I whispered. "I am tired." This house, it is too big. The ghosts are too loud. Connor's face lit up. It was like watching a starving wolf spot a wounded deer. I knew you would understand, Silas. It is the logical choice. I can have the real estate agent here tomorrow. We can list it by Friday. No, I said sharply. Then I caught myself and softened my tone. No, Connor. Not that fast. He frowned. Why wait? The market is peaking now. Because of the papers, I said. What papers? He asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. 40 years of papers, Connor. Architectural blueprints, contracts, and Bernice's letters. There are boxes and boxes in the basement and the attic. I cannot just throw them away. I need to sort them. I need to say goodbye to my life properly. How long do you need? He asked, tapping his fingers on the table. 3 months, I said. 3 months. That is too long, Silas. We could miss the market window. I looked him dead in the eye, channeling a flicker of the man I used to be. It is my house, Connor, and if you want me to sign that deed, I need 3 months to clear out my memories, unless you want to drag me out screaming in front of the neighbors. Connor looked at Jasmine. She nodded. Give him the time, Connor. It is only fair. 3 months is not that long. He clenched his jaw. I could see him calculating the interest on his debts. 3 months would be tight. The sharks would be circling. But he had no choice. If he pushed too hard, Jasmine might crack. Fine, he said, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. 3 months, but not a day more, Silas. We list the house on the 1st of December. I nodded. Thank you, son. I went to bed early that night, but I did not sleep. I waited until the house was silent. I waited until I heard the rhythmic breathing of my enemies down the hall. Then I slipped out of bed, dressed in black, and climbed out the window of my study, just like I used to do when I was a teenager sneaking out to see Bernice. I did not take my car. Connor tracked the mileage. I walked 3 blocks to the all-night diner on 47th Street. Sitting in the back booth nursing a black coffee was Vance. Vance had been my lawyer since the 70s. He was a man who spoke little and listened much. He wore suits that were out of style, but he knew the law better than he knew his own wife. You look like hell, Silas, he said as I slid into the booth opposite him. I feel like hell, Vance. I am living with a viper. Did you bring the documents, he asked. I pulled a thick envelope from inside my jacket. It contained the deed to the house, the titles to my investments, and the access codes to my offshore accounts. Do it, I said. Vance opened the envelope and scanned the papers. An irrevocable blind trust, he muttered. You know what this means, Silas. Once you sign this, you lose control. The assets belong to the trust. You cannot sell them. You cannot borrow against them. And most importantly, no one can touch them, not even you. That is the point, I said, sipping the bitter coffee. Connor is going to try to sell the house in 3 months. I want him to go through the whole process. I want him to hire the agent. I want him to stage the furniture. I want him to accept an offer. And on the day of the closing, I want the title company to tell him that the house does not belong to Silas Thorne anymore. Vance chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. That is cold, Silas. That is incredibly cold. The boy will be on the hook for the realtor fees, the staging costs. And he will have promised the money to people who break legs for a living, I added. Vance pulled a pen from his pocket. It was a gold fountain pen I had given him 20 years ago. Who is the trustee, he asked. You are, I said. And the beneficiary is the Bernice Thorne Foundation for Young Architects. Jasmine gets a stipend only if she divorces him. If she stays with him, she gets nothing. Vance nodded. Tough love. It is the only kind that works on a poisoning, I said. I signed the papers. The ink flowed dark and permanent onto the page. With every signature, I felt a weight lifting off my chest. I was effectively making myself a pauper on paper. I was giving away my kingdom to save it. When we finished, Vance put the documents in his briefcase. You know he is going to be furious, he said. He might get violent, Silas. I smiled. Let him. I have cameras, Vance. Every room, every angle. If he raises a hand to me, he goes to prison. If he tries to forge my signature, he goes to prison. If he tries to kill me, the trust automatically sends the footage to the district attorney. I have checkmated him, and he does not even know the game has started. I walked back to the house under the cover of darkness. The rain had started again, washing away my footprints. I climbed back into my study window and undressed in the dark. As I lay in bed, I looked at the ceiling where the smoke detector blinked its silent red eye. 3 months. I had bought myself 90 days. For the next few weeks, I played my part perfectly. I spent hours in the basement sorting through old boxes. I made a show of crying over old photographs when Jasmine came down to check on me. I let Connor see me shredding documents, making him think I was clearing the way for the sale. He was so arrogant, he started bringing contractors by to give estimates on renovations for the sale. He walked them through my house, pointing at walls he wanted to knock down, talking about how he was going to open up the space. He ignored me sitting in the corner, treating me like a piece of old furniture that came with the property. One afternoon, I heard him on the phone in the hallway. "Yeah, the old man is cooperating," he laughed. "He is sorting his papers like a good little boy. We will list in December. I already have a buyer lined up, a developer who wants to tear it down and build 2 modern units on the lot. Tear it down. He wasn't going to sell it to a family. He was going to bulldoze the home I built for my wife. He was going to erase every memory, every height chart marked on the doorframe, every pencil mark I had made on the walls." I felt a surge of rage so hot it almost blinded me. I wanted to walk out there and smash the phone into his perfect teeth, but I stayed in my chair. I picked up a photo of Bernice. "Hold on, baby," I whispered to the picture. "Just a little longer." He thinks he is selling a house. He does not know he is selling his own grave. The psychological warfare was taking its toll on me, though. It is exhausting to pretend to be weak when you are strong. It is draining to be treated like an invalid in your own castle. I started to lose weight. The dark circles under my eyes became real. Jasmine noticed. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked one evening, bringing me a cup of tea. "You look so thin." "I'm just preparing honey," I said, taking her hand. My hand was cold, preparing for the big move. She looked guilty. I could see the doubt in her eyes. She missed the father who used to lift her up on his shoulders. She was starting to realize that by agreeing to Connor's plan, she was killing me. I decided to twist the knife a little. "Jasmine," I said, looking at the tea, "do you remember when you were 10 and you broke Mrs. Gable's window with your baseball?" She smiled, a sad, nostalgic smile. "Yeah, I was so scared. And do you remember what I told you?" "You told me that a thorn never runs away from a mistake," she said, reciting the words I had drilled into her. "You said we own our mess and we fix it." I squeezed her hand. "I am proud of you, Jasmine. You are a good woman. I hope you never have to run away from a mistake you made." She pulled her hand away as if burned. She knew what I meant. She walked out of the room, quickly wiping her eyes. I took a sip of the tea. It was chamomile. Connor had probably told her to give it to me to help me sleep, to keep the old man sedated. I poured the tea into the potted plant by the window. I needed to stay awake, because tonight I was going to plant the second trap. The trust was the shield. But I needed a sword, and I was about to find it in Connor's past. The 3 months were ticking down. The leaves were falling from the oak trees in the yard, leaving the branches bare and skeletal. The house felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for the executioner. But the executioner did not know that the prisoner had already bribed the judge. The day of reckoning was coming, and it was not going to be the one Connor expected. He was planning a sale. I was planning a funeral for his ambitions. I gripped the edge of my tablet. He was drinking my scotch, sitting on my furniture and talking to another woman about how much he despised me. But it was the name that caught me. Sarah. He had introduced Sarah to us once at the wedding via a quick FaceTime call. He had said she was his older sister living in Denver who couldn't make the trip because of a high-risk pregnancy. But the woman on the screen was not pregnant, and she certainly did not look like a sister. The way she looked at him, the way she licked her lips when he mentioned the money, it was not familial. It was carnal. "We need that money, Connor," Sarah said, leaning closer to her camera. "The balloon payment on the condo is due in January. If we do not pay, they are going to foreclose. I am tired of living out of a suitcase." "Don't worry, babe," Connor said, blowing a kiss at the screen. "Once I sell this place, we are gone. I will leave Jasmine a note and we will be on a plane to Rio before she even realizes the accounts are empty. Just be patient. I love you. I love you too." The call ended. Connor sat there for a moment, smiling at his reflection in the dark screen of his phone. Then he got up and poured himself another drink. I sat in my room, frozen. Rio. He was not just planning to steal my money. He was planning to abandon my daughter. He was going to use her, destroy her credit, break her heart, and then vanish into the wind with this Sarah woman. The rage I felt was so intense I thought I might have a stroke for real. I wanted to go downstairs and beat him until he could not stand. I wanted to drag him out of my house by his hair, but I forced myself to breathe. In, out, in, out. A tantrum would solve nothing. Violence would only put me in jail and leave Jasmine vulnerable. I needed ammunition. I needed to know exactly who Sarah was. 2 days later, I met with the private investigator. I had hired a man named Miller, who used to be a detective in the fraud division. We met in the back of a library of all places, surrounded by the smell of old paper and silence. Miller slid a manila envelope across the table. He looked tired. "You were right to be suspicious," Mr. Thorne Miller said, keeping his voice low. "Connor is not who he says he is. In fact, Connor is not even his real name. He was born Conrad Hilt. And Sarah, she is not his sister." I opened the folder. There was a copy of a marriage certificate from Nevada dated 5 years ago. Conrad Hilt and Sarah Miller. There were no divorce papers. "She is his wife," Miller said. "They have been running this scam for years. He marries a woman with assets, drains her accounts, and then disappears. Sarah is his accomplice. She plays the sister, the cousin, or sometimes just the distant relative to help coordinate the exit. They are legally married, Silas, which means his marriage to your daughter is void. It is bigamy. It is a felony." I stared at the document. Bigamy. The word felt heavy and archaic, but the reality was sharp as a knife. My daughter was not married. She was a victim of a long con. Every vow he had made to her was a lie. Every moment of intimacy was a crime. "We have enough to arrest him right now," Miller said, tapping the table. "I can call a friend in the district attorney's office. We can have him in cuffs by dinner time." I looked at the photo of Connor and Sarah clinking champagne glasses on a boat somewhere. I thought about Jasmine. I thought about how much she loved him. If I arrested him now for bigamy, he would go to prison for a few years, maybe less, with a good lawyer. He would claim it was a mistake, a clerical error. He would spin a story. And Jasmine, she would be heartbroken, but she might still pity him. She might still wonder. "No," I said, closing the folder. "Not yet." Miller looked surprised. "Silas, he is committing a crime in your house. He is committing a crime against my heart," I said. "But if we stop him now, he gets off light. He loses the game, but he keeps his skin. I do not want him to just lose. I want him destroyed. I want him to commit the big sin. I want him to commit fraud so massive that he never sees the light of day again." "You are playing a dangerous game," Miller warned. "If he figures out, he thinks I am a senile old man who loses his keys," I said, standing up. "He thinks he is the predator. Let him think that. Let him feel safe. Let him reach for the prize. And when he grabs it, I want it to be an anchor that drags him to the bottom of the ocean." I took the file and hid it inside my jacket. I walked out of the library and into the cold autumn wind. The walk home felt longer than usual. I was carrying a secret that could shatter my daughter's world, but I had to hold it. I had to let the poison fester so I could cut it out completely. That evening, I sat at the dinner table watching Connor eat. He was telling a story about a difficult client at work, making himself sound like a financial genius. Jasmine was listening intently, her eyes shining with pride. "How is your sister doing, Connor?" I asked, suddenly interrupting him. Connor froze for a fraction of a second. His fork hovered halfway to his mouth. Then the mask slid back into place. "She is good, Silas, thanks for asking. Still on bed rest. It is tough, but she is a fighter." I nodded slowly, chewing my food. "Is she? That is good. Family is important, Connor. You should invite her to stay with us after the baby comes. There is plenty of room." Connor laughed, a nervous sound. "Oh, I do not think she could travel. But maybe. We will see." I looked at Jasmine. "Your husband is a good man, Jasmine, taking care of his family, taking care of me. You are a lucky woman." I saw Connor relax. He preened under the compliment. He thought he had fooled me again. He had no idea that I was looking at a dead man walking. I finished my meal and excused myself, saying I needed to rest. As I walked up the stairs, I felt the weight of the cane in my hand. It was not just a support anymore. It was a scepter of judgment. Connor was not just a bad husband. He was a criminal, a bigamist, a con artist. And he was in my house sleeping in my daughter's bed. The urge to vomit was strong, but I swallowed it down. I would keep the secret. I would let him think he was winning. I would let him try to sell my house. I would let him try to steal my fortune. Because when the trap finally snapped shut, I wanted there to be no escape. I wanted the evidence to be so overwhelming that even God himself could not defend him. I went into my room and locked the door. I took out the marriage certificate and hid it inside the lining of my old army jacket hanging in the closet. "Sleep well, Connor," I whispered to the empty room. "Dream of Rio. Dream of the money. Because when you wake up, you are going to find yourself in a nightmare that you cannot talk your way out of." The mysterious woman was not a mystery anymore. She was the key. And now that I had the key, I just needed to wait for the right moment to lock the door. The 3 months were ticking away, and with every passing day, Connor was digging his grave a little deeper. I just hoped I could protect Jasmine from the dirt when it finally started to fall. The morning sun hit the kitchen counter, illuminating the 7-day plastic pill organizer that kept my blood pressure in check. For 5 years, that little blue box had been my lifeline. Every Sunday night, I filled it with the precision of an architect laying a foundation. But on this particular Tuesday morning, the box was no longer a lifeline. It was a loaded gun. I sat in my study watching the live feed from the kitchen camera on my tablet. My hands were shaking not from age or infirmity, but from a rage so cold it burned. I watched Connor standing at the counter. He looked over his shoulder, checking the hallway to ensure Jasmine was in the shower. Satisfied that he was alone, he opened the Wednesday compartment of my pillbox. With a pair of tweezers, he extracted the 2 small white tablets that kept my heart from exploding. He dropped them into the garbage disposal and flipped the switch. The grinding sound was brief and brutal. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small tin. He placed 2 identical white pills into the compartment. They looked exactly like my medication. To the naked eye, they were perfect replicas. But I knew what they were. I had seen the receipt in his jacket pocket when I checked the coat closet earlier. They were placebo pills made of compressed sugar. He was not just stealing my money anymore. He was trying to kill me. Or worse, he was trying to induce a medical crisis that would leave me alive but incapacitated. If my blood pressure spiked, I could have a minor stroke. I could get dizzy. I could fall. And if I fell, he would be there to catch me, not to save me, but to bind me. I watched him close the box and walk away whistling a cheerful tune. He poured himself a cup of coffee, the picture of a loving son-in-law. I put down the tablet. I sat there for a long time staring at the wall. This was the line. He had crossed the line from con artist to predator. He was willing to risk my life to expedite the sale of the house. He wanted me out of the way before the 3 months were up. He wanted a medical emergency to force Jasmine's hand. If I walked into the kitchen and confronted him now, he would deny it. He would say I was confused. He would say I mixed up the pills myself. He would gaslight me until I doubted my own sanity. No, I needed to beat him at his own game. He wanted a show. I would give him a performance worthy of an Oscar. I stood up and walked to the mirror. I practiced my expression. I let my jaw go slack. I let my eyes lose their focus. I practiced the slump of a man whose body is betraying him. Then I walked into the kitchen. "Good morning, Silas," Connor said, turning around with a bright smile. He handed me a glass of water. "Time for your meds." I took the glass. My hand trembled slightly. "Thank you, Connor," I said. "I do not know what I would do without you." I picked up the pill box. I popped the Wednesday lid. I tipped the sugar pills into my palm. Connor watched me like a hawk. His eyes were fixated on my hand. He needed me to swallow them. He needed the poison to enter the system. I brought my hand to my mouth. I coughed, covering my mouth with my other hand. In that split second of distraction, I palmed the pills and pretended to swallow. I took a large gulp of water, throwing my head back. "All down?" Connor asked. "All down," I lied. 10 minutes later, Jasmine came into the kitchen dressed for work. She kissed my cheek. "You look pale, Dad. Are you okay?" "I am fine, honey," I said, gripping the edge of the table. "Just a little dizzy." Connor looked up from his phone. His eyes lit up. "Dizzy. Maybe you should sit down, Silas. You have been overexerting yourself with those boxes in the basement." I stood up. I took one step and then I unleashed the performance. I let my knees buckle. I grabbed the tablecloth, dragging the fruit bowl down with me. Oranges and apples rolled across the floor. I hit the linoleum with a heavy thud, making sure to protect my hip but making it look uncontrolled. Jasmine screamed. She dropped her bag and rushed to my side. I lay on the floor breathing in shallow gasps. My eyes fluttered. "The room is spinning," I whispered, slurring my words. "Jasmine, where are you?" "I am right here, Dad." Jasmine was crying, stroking my face. "Connor, help him. Call 911. Connor was beside us in an instant. He did not call 911. He checked my pulse. He looked at my eyes. He was acting the part of the hero, but I could feel his excitement. This was it. This was the moment he had engineered. "No ambulance," he said firmly. "It will take too long. I will drive him. My friend Dr. Evans is the chief of internal medicine at St. Jude's. I will call him on the way. He can bypass the waiting room." Dr. Evans. Another name for my list. Another player in the game. They lifted me into the car. Jasmine sat in the back with me, holding my hand, weeping. I hated making her cry. It broke my heart to see her terror, but I had to stay in character. I squeezed her hand weakly. "I love you, princess," I murmured. Connor drove like a maniac, weaving through traffic. He was on his Bluetooth headset, speaking in rapid, hushed tones. "Yeah, Evans, we are coming in." He collapsed. "Looks like a TIA or maybe a severe pressure spike." "Yeah, I have the medical power of attorney paperwork in the glove box just in case. Be ready." He hung up. He looked in the rearview mirror and caught my eye. For a second, he dropped the mask. He winked. A tiny, almost imperceptible wink. He thought I was fading out. He thought he was winking at a dying man. We arrived at the hospital. A team was waiting. Not the regular ER staff, but a specific team led by a tall, thin man with gray hair and cold eyes. Dr. Evans. They loaded me onto a gurney. Jasmine tried to follow, but Evans stopped her. "We need to stabilize him, Mrs. Hilt," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "Please wait in the lounge. We will take good care of him." They wheeled me into a private examination room. Evans shooed the nurses away, saying he would handle the initial assessment himself. Connor came in with him closing the door. I lay on the bed, eyes half closed, watching through my lashes. Evans did not check my blood pressure. He did not check my reflexes. He walked over to Connor and they shook hands. "Nice timing," Evans said. "Is he out?" Connor asked, looking at me. "He is unresponsive," Evans said. "The pressure drop must have knocked him for a loop. Did he take the sugar pills? Watched him swallow them myself." Connor laughed. A cruel, triumphant laugh, Good Evans said. "I will draw some blood, but I will swap the labels. The lab report will show his levels are chaotic, erratic, consistent with a man who can no longer manage his own medication." "And the diagnosis?" Connor asked. Evans picked up a chart. He clicked his pen. "Vascular dementia accelerated by hypertension. We will say he suffered a series of microstrokes that have impaired his cognitive function. He is a danger to himself. He cannot live alone. He cannot manage his finances." "Perfect," Connor said. "That is exactly what I need for the judge. How soon can we get the guardianship signed?" "Today," Evans said. "Once I put this in his official file, he is legally incompetent. You will have full control by tomorrow morning." I lay there listening to them plot the theft of my life. They were discussing my freedom as if it were a used car they were stripping for parts. Vascular dementia. A death sentence for my independence. Evans walked over to me. He shone a light in my eyes. I kept my pupils fixed, staring past him. "Can you hear me, Silas?" he asked loudly, performing for the empty room. I did not answer. "He is gone. Connor, he is basically a vegetable right now. The lights are on, but nobody is home." Connor walked over. He leaned down close to my ear. I could smell his cologne mixed with the sweat of his anticipation. "You had a good run, old man," he whispered. "But it is my turn now. You should have just signed the papers when I asked. Now you are going to rot in a state facility while I drink margaritas in Rio." He patted my cheek. A soft, mocking pat. I forced every muscle in my body to remain limp. I forced my heart to beat slowly. Inside, I was screaming. I was a warrior trapped in a statue. But I knew that this moment, this confession, was the final nail in his coffin. I did not have a recorder on me, but I knew something they didn't. The smoke detector in this room was blinking in a very specific pattern. St. Jude's had recently upgraded their security system. My firm had consulted on the installation. I knew that every private exam room had audio-visual recording for liability purposes. and I knew that the footage was stored on a secure server that was backed up every 24 hours. Connor had brought me to his friend's hospital thinking it was safe ground. He did not know he had brought me into another one of my buildings. Evans opened the door and called the nurses back in. "Okay, let's hook him up to the monitors. Give him some saline. I will go talk to the family." Connor and Evans walked out to the waiting room. I lay alone in the room listening to the beep of the heart monitor. Beep, beep, beep. It was the rhythm of a countdown. 10 minutes later, Jasmine came in. She looked devastated. Her eyes were red and swollen. Connor had his arm around her, playing the pillar of strength. "The doctor says it is dementia," Jasmine sobbed, burying her face in my chest. "He says you have been hiding it for a long time. He says you can't come home, Dad. It is too dangerous." I stroked her hair. My hand felt heavy. I looked at Connor over her head. He was making a sad face, but his eyes were dancing. He had won. He had the diagnosis. He had the girl. He was about to have the money. "Don't worry, Silas," Connor said. "I will take care of everything. I will handle the house. I will handle the accounts. You just rest." I closed my eyes. I let a single tear roll down my cheek. Not a tear of sadness, but a tear of performance. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay." They left me there to sleep. But as soon as the door clicked shut, my eyes snapped open. I was not demented. I was not sick. And I was not finished. Tomorrow they would try to file the guardianship papers. Tomorrow they would try to lock me away. But tomorrow was also the day the 3-month deadline on the house expired. Tomorrow was the day the trust kicked in. And tomorrow was the day I would ask my lawyer Vance to subpoena the security footage from exam room 4B. Connor thought he had used medicine to trap me. He did not realize that medicine is a science and science relies on evidence. He had just created the most damning piece of evidence in history. I lay back on the pillow and watched the heart monitor. My pulse was strong, my mind was clear, the trap was set, the bait was taken. Now it was time to reel them in. The morning after the incident at the hospital, the house felt different. It was no longer a home, it was a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided and the execution was scheduled for breakfast. I sat at the kitchen table staring at a bowl of oatmeal that had gone cold. My hand was resting on the table and I made sure to keep a slight tremor going even when no one was looking directly at me. It was muscle memory now. The mask of the invalid had fused to my skin. Connor came downstairs first. He was wearing his best suit, a navy blue Italian cut that cost more than my first car. He looked like a man who was about to close the deal of a lifetime. He carried a leather portfolio under his arm and the way he placed it on the table was deliberate. It hit the wood with a heavy final thud. Jasmine followed him a moment later. She looked terrible. Her eyes were red and swollen and she had clearly been crying all night. She couldn't even look me in the eye. She busied herself making coffee, her movements jerky and nervous. I wanted to stand up and hug her. I wanted to tell her that her husband was a liar and a thief, but I couldn't. Not yet. I had to play the scene to the end. Connor poured himself a cup of coffee and sat opposite me. He folded his hands on the table. He looked at me with that practiced sympathy that made my blood boil. "Silas, we need to talk about the future," he said softly. I looked up slowly, blinking as if I was trying to process his words through a fog. "The future," I repeated, my voice raspy. "Yes, Dad," Jasmine said, turning from the counter. She walked over and sat next to me, taking my hand. Her hand was cold. "Dad, Dr. Evans was very clear yesterday. The incident with the pills, the fall. It is getting worse." "It was just a dizzy spell," I muttered, pulling my hand away slightly. "I am fine. You are not fine." "Silas," Connor said, his voice hardening just a fraction. "You could have died yesterday. If I hadn't been there, if I hadn't known what to do, you would be in a morgue right now, and next time I might not be there." He opened the leather portfolio. He pulled out a stack of documents. They were thick, printed on heavy bond paper. I could see the legal headers even from a distance. Durable power of attorney. Transfer of executive control. Guardianship. "We cannot risk the company," Connor continued. "You are the majority shareholder, Silas. If the board finds out about your condition, the stock will plummet. We need to get ahead of this. We need to show them that there is a succession plan in place." A steady hand at the wheel. I looked at the papers. This was it. The coup de grace. He wasn't just asking to help. He was asking for total control. He wanted the right to sign checks, the right to sell assets, the right to put me in a home, and the right to pull the plug on my life support. "I cannot sign that," I said, shaking my head. "The company is my life. I built it from nothing." "Dad, please," Jasmine begged. Tears started to stream down her face again. "It is not permanent. It is just temporary. Just until you get better. Connor can handle the stress. He can deal with the lawyers and the accountants. You need to rest. You need to focus on your health. Please, Dad, do it for me. I cannot lose you. I cannot spend every day worrying that you are going to collapse in a meeting." I looked at my daughter. She was being ripped apart. She loved me, and she believed she was saving me. She didn't see the wolf sitting across the table. She only saw her husband, the hero who had rushed me to the hospital. Connor had weaponized her love. He was using her tears to wash away his crimes. I looked at Connor. He was watching me intently. He held a pen in his hand. A Mont Blanc, my Mont Blanc, the one I had left in the study. He was offering it to me. "It is the only logical choice, Silas," he said, "unless you want us to petition the court. If we do that, it becomes public record. Everyone will know you are unfit. It will destroy your legacy. Sign the papers. Let me protect what you built." The threat was clear. Sign or be humiliated. Sign or be dragged through a public competency hearing where his paid-off doctor would testify that I was a vegetable. I let out a long, shuddering sigh. I looked around the kitchen, this room where I had fed Jasmine breakfast before school, this room where Bernice and I had danced to the radio. Now it was the room where I would sign away my freedom, or so they thought. I reached out with a trembling hand and took the pen. I pulled the papers closer. I adjusted my glasses. "Show me where," I said. Connor flipped to the last page. His fingers were quick, eager. "Right here, Silas, and here, and an initial here." I hovered the pen over the signature line. Connor leaned in, his breath hitched. He was so close. He could taste the money. He could see the millions in the bank accounts that these papers would unlock. I looked at the paper. Silas E. Thorne. That was my name. That was the name on the deeds, the name on the bank accounts, the name on the awards. But there was something Connor didn't know. Something nobody knew except me and the head of security at my private bank. Decades ago, when I first started making real money, I worked in neighborhoods where extortion was common. I learned early on that a man with a gun to his head will sign anything. So I created a fail-safe, a protocol. I had registered 2 signatures with the bank and the legal department of my firm. Signature A was my standard signature, Silas E. Thorne, with a flowing loop on the S and a sharp underline. This was the valid signature. Signature B was my duress signature. It looked almost identical. But in the duress signature, I would omit the middle initial E, and I would put a small, almost invisible period after my last name, Silas Thorne. To the naked eye, it looked like a tired man skipping a letter. To a forensic accountant or my bank's fraud algorithm, it was a silent alarm. It meant I am being coerced. This document is void. Freeze everything. I pressed the pen to the paper. I felt the resistance of the nib. "I am doing this for you, Jasmine," I said, my voice breaking. "Only for you." I signed. Silas Thorne. I put the period at the end, a tiny black dot of rebellion. I signed the second page, Silas Thorne. I signed the third, Silas Thorne. With every stroke of the pen, Connor's smile grew wider. He was practically vibrating. He saw the ink. He saw the letters. He didn't see the missing E. He didn't see the period. He was too blinded by his own greed to notice the details. And the devil, as they say, is always in the details. I finished the last signature and dropped the pen. It rolled across the table. I slumped back in my chair, closing my eyes, pretending to be exhausted by the effort. Connor snatched the papers up. He didn't even wait for the ink to dry. He scanned them quickly, checking to make sure every line was filled. "You did the right thing, Silas," he said, his voice triumphant. "You won't regret this." I opened my eyes. I looked at him. "Oh, I know I won't," I thought. "But you certainly will." "I will take these to the office today," Connor said, standing up. "We will get them notarized and filed. I will start the transfer of authority immediately. Jasmine, why don't you take your dad up to his room? Let him rest. He has had a big morning." Jasmine nodded, wiping her face. "Come on, Dad. Let's get you comfortable." She helped me up. I leaned on her heavy, letting her take my weight. As we walked to the stairs, I heard Connor whistling again. He was pulling out his phone, probably texting Sarah. Probably texting the loan sharks. "It is done. I have the power." He had a piece of paper, yes. But he didn't have the power. He had a confession. When he walked into the bank with those papers, the teller would scan them. The system would flag the missing initial. The silent alarm would trigger. The account would lock down. And a notification would be sent to my lawyer, Vance, and the police fraud division. By signing those papers, I hadn't given him my money. I had given him the rope to hang himself. I climbed the stairs one slow step at a time. My heart was heavy because of Jasmine's pain, but my mind was sharp. I was not a victim. I was a sniper waiting for the target to walk into the crosshairs. Jasmine tucked me into bed. She kissed my forehead. "I am sorry, Dad," she whispered. "I know you didn't want to do it." I looked at her. Her face was full of guilt. She thought she had betrayed me. She didn't know that she had just helped me spring the trap. "It is okay, honey," I whispered. "Everything is going to be okay." She left the room, closing the door softly. I waited until I heard her footsteps fade away. I waited until I heard the front door slam as Connor left the house to rush to the bank. I threw off the covers. I walked to the window and watched his car peel out of the driveway. He was driving fast. He was in a hurry to claim his prize. "Go ahead, Connor," I said to the glass. "Run to the bank, present your papers, demand your throne." I walked over to my desk and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. I wrote down the time and the date. I wrote down a description of the coercion. I wrote down that I had used the duress signature. Then I hid the note in the spine of an old architectural textbook. The clock was ticking. Connor would be at the bank in 20 minutes. It would take them another 20 minutes to process the paperwork. And then the phone calls would start. He would call me screaming. He would come back here in a rage. I needed to be ready. I checked the battery on the hidden camera in my bedroom. Full charge. I checked the position of my cane. Within reach. I sat down in the armchair by the window and waited. The first phase of the war was over. I had feigned weakness. I had retreated. I had given ground. Now the second phase began, the counterattack. Connor Hilt thought he had just become the CEO of my life. He was about to find out that he was just the janitor of his own disaster, and the mess he was about to clean up was going to be biblical. The ink on the guardianship papers was barely dry before the occupation turned into a carnival. With the legal authority tucked safely in his safe, or at least what he thought was legal authority, Connor Hilt stopped pretending. The concerned son-in-law mask was tossed into the trash along with my dietary restrictions and my peace of mind. He walked through the hallways with a new strut, a swagger that said he owned every square inch of the floorboards beneath his feet. He stopped knocking on doors. He stopped asking how I was feeling. In his mind, I had transitioned from a person to an asset, a line item on a spreadsheet that he had successfully acquired. It started on Friday evening. I was sitting in the library reading a book, or rather pretending to read, while I watched the driveway through the sheer curtains. I expected a quiet night. Instead, I saw the headlights. One car after another pulled up onto the limestone pavers I had laid myself 30 years ago. They were not family cars. They were Porsche's Range Rovers and sleek convertibles driven by people who looked like they had never worked a day of hard labor in their lives. Connor met them at the door. He was wearing a velvet smoking jacket that he had found in my closet. It was a jacket Bernice had bought me for our 25th anniversary, a jacket I rarely wore because it felt too ostentatious. On him, it looked like a costume. He was playing the Lord of the Manor. I walked out into the foyer leaning heavily on my cane. The house was filling up with noise. There were about 20 people, young, wealthy, and white. They carried expensive bottles of wine and looked at the high ceilings with hungry, appraising eyes. They did not wipe their shoes on the mat. They tracked mud and autumn leaves onto the Persian rug. "Who are these people, Connor?" I asked, making my voice sound thin and tremulous. Connor turned around, holding a glass of champagne. "Oh, Silas, these are my associates. We are celebrating. A little merger, you might say." He winked at a tall man with slicked back hair who laughed as if it was the funniest joke in the world. "Celebrating what I asked. Celebrating the future, old man," Connor said, clapping me on the shoulder hard enough to make me stumble. "Why don't you go back to your room? It is going to get loud down here. You need your beauty sleep." A woman in a red dress giggled. "Is this him?" she whispered loud enough for me to hear. "Is this the architect?" "He looks like the crypt keeper," the tall man whispered back. I gripped my cane. My knuckles turned white. I wanted to swing it. I wanted to clear the room like a biblical wrath. But I forced myself to turn around. I forced myself to shuffle away, my head bowed in submission. I went to my room, but I did not stay there. I activated the app on my tablet, I put in my earbuds, and I became the invisible witness to the desecration of my home. They treated my house like a hotel. They put their feet on the antique coffee tables. They spilled red wine on the cream upholstery and didn't even bother to blot it up. They wandered through the rooms, picking up my artifacts, my awards, and my photos, sneering at them before putting them back in the wrong places. But the worst blow came the next morning. It was Saturday. I woke up to the sound of shouting in the front yard. I went to the window. Mr. Henderson was there. He is a man of my generation, a black man with hands like gnarled oak roots who has tended my garden for 20 years. He knows every rose bush, every hydrangea, and every blade of grass on my property. He was on his knees weeding the flower beds just as he did every Saturday morning. Connor was standing over him, screaming. "I told you to clear out those bushes," Connor yelled, pointing at the prize-winning azaleas Bernice had planted. "They are ugly. They date the house. I want them gone." Mr. Henderson stood up, taking off his hat. "Mr. Connor, sir, those azaleas are 50 years old. Mrs. Thorne loved them. I cannot dig them up. It would kill them." "I do not pay you to have an opinion," Connor spat. "I pay you to dig. Now dig them up or get off my property." Mr. Henderson looked up at the house. He saw me standing in the window. Our eyes met. He saw the pain in my face. He saw the helplessness I was projecting. He thought I had lost my mind. He thought I was too sick to intervene. "I cannot do that, sir," Mr. Henderson said quietly. "It isn't right." "Then you are fired," Connor screamed. "Get your truck and get out. You are done. I will hire a landscaping crew on Monday. Someone who knows how to follow orders." Connor turned and marched back into the house, slamming the door. I watched Mr. Henderson stand there for a long moment. He shook his head slowly. He looked at the azaleas one last time, touching a bloom with his gentle, calloused hand. Then he walked to his truck. I moved away from the window, my heart breaking. I added another line to the ledger, another debt Connor would have to pay. He had insulted a good man. He had disrespected the earth Bernice loved. That night the party resumed. It was bigger this time. The music was thumping so hard I could feel the bass in my floorboards. It was a celebration of victory. Connor thought he had won the war. He thought the house was his. The money was his. And I was just a ghost haunting the attic. I decided to go down. I needed water, but mostly I needed evidence. I slipped a small, high-fidelity recorder into the pocket of my cardigan. It was running, capturing every sound. I walked into the living room. The air was thick with smoke and perfume. They ignored me. Truly ignored me. It was as if I didn't exist. They walked around me, they talked over me. I was less than a servant, I was furniture. I made my way to the kitchen but stopped in the archway. Connor was holding court by the fireplace. He was drunk. His face was flushed and his tie was loose. He was holding a glass of my rarest scotch, a 40-year-old single malt that I was saving for Jasmine's first child. He raised the glass. "To the deal of the century," he shouted. His friends cheered, raising their glasses. "You know, someone asked a man with a heavy gold watch, 'How did you pull it off, Connor?' The old man seemed pretty sharp at the wedding." Connor laughed. "A cruel, wet sound. Sharp. Please, he is a relic, just like this house." He gestured around the room, sloshing amber liquid onto the floor. "Look at this place," he sneered. "It is dark. It is heavy. It smells like struggle." He took a long drink and wiped his mouth. "You know what makes this taste so good," he said, pointing a finger at the ceiling at the room where he thought I was sleeping. "It is the irony." "What irony?" the man asked. Connor grinned, showing all his teeth. "This old man, this black old man, he spent his whole life working, scratching his way up from the gutter, fighting for every brick, saving every dime, thinking he was building a legacy, thinking he was building a dynasty." He paused for dramatic effect. "And for what?" he whispered loudly. "For who?" He tapped his own chest. "For me." The room went silent for a second, then erupted in laughter. He stacked the bricks. Connor continued, his voice rising. He poured the concrete. He took the insults. He ate the dirt. All so that 30 years later a white boy from the suburbs could walk in, take the keys, and drink his scotch. He swirled the glass. "Cheers to affirmative action," he said, mocking me. He earned it so I could burn it. The laughter was deafening. It was the sound of jackals tearing at a carcass. I stood in the shadows of the archway, my hand clutching the fabric of my cardigan. The recorder in my pocket was warm against my side. I felt a cold calm wash over me. It was the calm of a sniper who has just adjusted for wind and distance. He had said it. He had said the quiet part out loud. It wasn't just greed. It was hate. It was a deep resentment of who I was and what I represented. He didn't just want my money. He wanted to erase my existence. He wanted to stand on the ashes of my life and claim he was the fire. I turned around slowly. I did not get my water. I walked back up the stairs. Every step was a promise. He earned it so I could burn it. That was what he said. I sat on the edge of my bed and took out the recorder. I stopped the recording. I saved the file. Then I backed it up to 3 different servers. I looked at the picture of Bernice on my nightstand. "Did you hear that, baby?" I whispered. "He thinks he is the fire." I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the party spilling out onto the patio. I saw Connor laughing, the center of attention, the king of the world. "Enjoy the scotch, Connor," I said softly. "Enjoy the laughter, because you just gave me the weapon that will strip you naked before the court. You just admitted it was a con. You just admitted it was racial. You just handed the jury a reason to hate you." He thought I was invisible. He thought I was powerless. But he forgot one thing about architects. We know that the tallest towers fall the hardest when the foundation is rotten, and Connor Hilt was rotten to the core. I turned off the lights and sat in the dark, listening to the bass thumping below. It sounded like a heartbeat, but it wasn't the heartbeat of the party. It was the heartbeat of the countdown. Tick, tock, Connor, tick, tock. The house was quiet on Tuesday evening, but it was the silence of a bomb counting down, not the silence of peace. The party was over. The guests had left their wine stains on my rugs, and Connor was locked in the study, my study, playing the role of the master of the universe. I was in my bedroom, sitting in the dark with my tablet glowing on my lap. I had become a nocturnal creature, living through the lens of tiny cameras, watching the people I loved and the people I hated move through the maze I had built. Jasmine came home late. I heard her car door slam and the heavy trudge of her footsteps up the porch stairs. She was tired. I could see it in the way she carried her shoulders. She had been working double shifts at the gallery trying to keep everything normal while her husband dismantled her father's legacy. She walked into the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water. Then she frowned. She picked up a piece of mail from the counter. It was a bank statement, one of the few that Connor hadn't intercepted. I watched on the screen as she opened it. Her eyes scanned the page. Then they stopped. She brought the paper closer to her face. She blinked once, twice. Then she turned and walked straight toward the study. My heart rate monitor on my wrist gave a soft beep. This was it, the collision course I had predicted. I switched the camera feed to the study. Connor was sitting at my desk, feet up, drinking from a bottle of expensive bourbon. He looked sloppy. Arrogance does that to a man. It makes him think he doesn't need to hide his tracks. Jasmine walked in without knocking. "Connor," she said, her voice tight. "What is this transfer to an account in the Cayman Islands? $50,000. Today." Connor didn't even take his feet off the desk. He just swirled his drink. "It is business, babe. Consulting fees. You wouldn't understand. The corporate structure is complicated. I do understand math." "Connor," she said, walking closer. "And I understand that this money came from the operating account for Dad's medical care. That is not corporate structure. That is stealing." Connor laughed. A dismissive, ugly sound. "Stealing. Please. I am the legal guardian. I can move assets wherever I want. It is for tax optimization. Stop worrying your pretty little head about it." "Don't talk to me like I am a child," Jasmine snapped. She slammed the paper onto the desk. Her hand hit the glass surface with a crack that made me jump. "This is wrong. You are draining his accounts. You fired Mr. Henderson. You are tearing up the garden. And now this. I am going to call the bank tomorrow and ask for an audit." Connor's feet dropped to the floor. The playful mask vanished. He stood up, and for the first time I saw the physical threat he posed. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and fueled by alcohol and entitlement. "You will do no such thing," he growled. "I am his daughter," Jasmine shouted, "and I am your wife. I have a right to know why you are sending $50,000 offshore when we have bills to pay here. Who is it for, Connor? Is it for that sister of yours?" Connor moved so fast the camera barely caught it. He rounded the desk. "You shut your mouth," he roared. Jasmine stood her ground. She had my blood in her veins. She had the spine of a woman who had been raised by a man who faced down racism in the construction yards of the 70s. "I will not shut up," she said, pointing a finger at his chest. "I am going to the bank, Connor. And if I find out you are lying to me—" The sound was sickening. It was a sharp, wet crack that echoed through the speakers of my tablet. Connor's hand lashed out a backhanded slap that caught Jasmine square across the face. She stumbled back, crashing into the bookshelf. A vase, one of Bernice's favorites, fell and shattered on the floor. I sat in my room and a primal roar rose in my throat. My hand gripped my cane so hard the wood groaned. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run down those stairs, to tear the door off its hinges, and to beat him until he stopped moving. I wanted to kill him. God is my witness, I wanted to end him right there. But I stayed in my chair. I watched my daughter hold her cheek. I watched the shock register in her eyes. I watched the realization wash over her. The man she loved, the man she had defended, the man she had betrayed her father for. He had just hit her. If I went down there now, if I played the hero, Connor would spin it. He would say she was hysterical. He would say he was defending himself. Or worse, he would hurt her more to get to me. No. She needed to feel this pain. It was cruel. It was the hardest thing I have ever done as a father, but she needed to see the wolf without its sheepskin. Jasmine didn't scream. She didn't cry. Not yet. She just looked at him. "Get out," she whispered. Connor looked at his hand, then at her. He sneered. "This is my house, Jasmine. You get out. Go cry to your daddy. Maybe he will remember who you are for 5 minutes." Jasmine turned and ran. I heard her footsteps on the stairs. I heard her sobbing now, a ragged, gasping sound that tore my heart into ribbons. I put down the tablet. I turned on the small lamp by my bedside. I sat up straight and waited. The door to my room burst open. Jasmine fell inside. She was trembling so hard she could barely stand. Her left cheek was already turning an angry red. "Dad," she choked out. "Daddy." She collapsed onto the floor by my bed, burying her face in the quilt. I didn't play the senile old man, not this time. I reached down and stroked her hair. My hand was steady. My touch was firm. "I know, baby girl," I said, my voice deep and clear. "I know." She froze. She stopped crying for a second and looked up at me. She saw my eyes. They weren't cloudy. They weren't confused. They were burning with a cold, intelligent fire. "Dad," she whispered, you are lucid." I pulled her up onto the bed beside me. I wrapped my arms around her, shielding her from the world. "I never left Jasmine," I said. "I have been here the whole time, watching, waiting. But the doctor, the pills, fake," I said. "All of it. He swapped my pills. He paid the doctor. He gaslit me with the keys, and I let him do it." She pulled back, looking at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Why? Why would you let him do this? Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you loved him," I said, wiping a tear from her bruised cheek. "Because if I had told you last month that your husband was a thief and a monster, you would have hated me. You would have defended him. You would have thought I was a jealous old man trying to ruin your happiness." I looked at the mark on her face. A surge of anger tightened my jaw, but I kept my voice soft. "Sometimes, Jasmine, you have to let the wolf show his teeth before you can convince the sheep to run. I had to wait until he bit you. And I am so sorry I had to wait this long." She started to cry again, but this time it was different. It wasn't the cry of a victim. It was the cry of someone waking up from a long nightmare. "He hit me, Dad. He hit me because I asked about the money. I know I said. I saw it. You saw it." I reached under my mattress and pulled out the tablet. I unlocked it and showed her the grid of camera feeds. The study, the kitchen, the living room. I have eyes everywhere, Jasmine. I have recorded everything, the fake pills, the safe cracking, the conversation with his doctor. And tonight. She stared at the screen. She saw Connor downstairs, pacing the room, pouring another drink, stepping over the broken vase. "He is a monster," she whispered. I tapped the screen and opened a file. It was the recording from the party, the speech about affirmative action, the speech where he called me a relic and admitted he married her for the money. "Listen," I said. "I played it." Connor's voice filled the quiet bedroom. "He earned it so I could burn it. Cheers to affirmative action." Jasmine listened. Her face went pale, then white, then a cold, hard stone gray. The love in her eyes died. I watched it happen. It was like watching a light switch satisfy flick off. In its place came something else, something dangerous. He mocked you, she said, her voice shaking with rage. He mocked your life. He mocked our family. He doesn't love you, Jasmine, I said gently. He never did. He loves the lifestyle. He loves the prey. She looked at her wedding ring. She twisted it on her finger. Then she pulled it off. She placed it on the nightstand next to my picture of Bernice. What do we do? She asked. Her voice was steady now. The tears had stopped. She sounded like a thorn. We finished the play, I said. You go back to your room. You lock the door. You tell him you are sorry in the morning. Sorry, she spat. I want to kill him. No, I said, gripping her shoulder. You will tell him you are sorry. You will tell him you were stressed. You will tell him you trust him. You will make him feel safe again. Because on Monday the 3 months are up. On Monday he goes to the title company to sell this house. And on Monday we are going to drop the guillotine. I reached into my drawer and pulled out a small ice pack I kept for my knees. I held it to her cheek. This hurts, I said. But let it remind you of who he is. Don't let him charm you. Don't let him apologize. Every time he smiles at you, I want you to feel this slap. I can do that, she said. I know you can. You are my daughter. You are a builder. And right now, we are building a trap. She lay her head on my shoulder. We sat there in the dark, 2 wounded soldiers in a bunker waiting for dawn. Downstairs, Connor was drunk on power, thinking he had disciplined his wife and defeated his father-in-law. He didn't know that upstairs the old man and the young woman were no longer victims. We were the jury, and the verdict had just been delivered. Go to sleep now, Jasmine, I whispered. We have a lot of acting to do tomorrow. She nodded and stood up. She looked at the tablet one last time. Good night, Dad. Good night, warrior. She slipped out of the room. I watched her go. My heart ached for her pain, but I felt a grim satisfaction. Connor had made a fatal mistake. He had turned the one person who could have saved him into the person who would destroy him. I looked at the screen. Connor had passed out in my chair, the bottle empty beside him. Sleep tight, son, I said to the image, because when you wake up, you are going to find that the sheep have grown fangs, and we are hungry for justice. The sun rose over Chicago, but it brought no warmth to the Thorne household. It only brought a cold, gray light that illuminated the battlefield. My daughter Jasmine sat on the edge of my bed, her eyes swollen and her hands trembling, but the hysteria of the night before had passed. In its place was a hollow, haunted silence that scared me more than her tears. She looked like a building that had been gutted by fire, leaving only the exterior walls standing. I knew that look. I had seen it on the faces of soldiers who had lost their innocence in a single moment of violence. I handed her a cup of black coffee. She took it, her fingers brushing against mine. Her skin was cold. I cannot go back down there, Dad, she whispered. I cannot look at him. I cannot let him touch me. It makes my skin crawl. I sat down beside her. The cane leaned against the nightstand, a reminder of the role I was playing. But in this room with the door locked, I was not the frail old man. I was her father, and I was the general of this resistance. You have to, Jasmine, I said, my voice low and steady. You have to go down there, and you have to be the woman he thinks he broke. If you run now, if you show him your anger, he will panic, and a panicked rat bites. He will drain the accounts remotely, he will destroy the evidence, and he will disappear before we can put the handcuffs on him. She took a sip of the coffee, wincing as the steam hit her bruised cheek. He is going to apologize, she said bitterly. He is going to tell me he loves me and that I made him do it. I know, I said. And you are going to accept it. You are going to cry. You are going to tell him you were stressed. You are going to tell him you trust him completely with the finances. You are going to feed his ego until he is fat and lazy and careless. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out a small silver USB drive. It was sleek and unassuming, no bigger than a stick of gum. But inside was a piece of software my private investigator Miller had given me. It was a keystroke logger and a screen mirror program. Once installed, it would send a copy of everything Connor did on his laptop directly to my secure server. I need you to plant this, I said, pressing the metal into her palm. She looked at it as if it were a grenade. On his laptop. Yes. He keeps it with him always, but he leaves it on the desk when he showers. Or when he is in the garden. You need 10 seconds. Plug it in, wait for the green light to flash twice, and then pull it out. The software installs instantly and runs in the background. It is invisible. Jasmine closed her fingers around the drive. Her knuckles turned white. This is spying, Dad. This is survival, I cut in. He is not your husband anymore, Jasmine. He is a hostile combatant in our home. He is planning to steal your future. This drive is the only way we get it back. She nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. She stood up. She walked to the mirror and looked at her reflection. She touched the bruise on her cheek. Then she did something that made me proud and terrified at the same time. She forced a smile. It was a fragile, broken smile, but it was convincing. Okay, she said. I am ready. She left the room. I watched her go, my heart aching. Sending my daughter back into the den of the wolf was the hardest thing I had ever done. But I knew she was strong. She was a thorn. We do not break. We rebuild. I turned to my tablet and switched the camera feed to the kitchen. Connor was there looking disheveled. He was drinking coffee and checking his phone. He looked nervous. He knew he had crossed a line last night. Jasmine walked into the frame. I held my breath. Connor looked up. He put his phone down. Jasmine, he started, his voice full of fake remorse. Baby, I am so sorry. I do not know what happened. The stress of the house, the merger. I snapped. I would never hurt you. Jasmine walked over to him. She didn't flinch. She wrapped her arms around his waist and buried her face in his chest. I know, Connor, she said, her voice muffled. I am sorry, too. I shouldn't have questioned you. I know you were doing everything for us. I was just tired. Connor exhaled a long breath. He hugged her back. I watched his face over her shoulder. He smiled. It was that same sickening, victorious smile. He thought he had reset the game. He thought she was back under his control. I forgive you, Jasmine said. Just, please don't be mad at me. I am not mad, Connor said, kissing the top of her head. I love you. Now why don't you go get ready for work? I have some calls to make. I need to fix this mess with the account so you don't have to worry anymore. Jasmine pulled away. Okay, I will go shower. She turned to leave, but then she paused. Oh, Connor, could you check the water heater in the basement? I think I heard it making a noise again. Dad would panic if the hot water went out. Connor sighed. Fine. I will check it. He put his coffee down and walked toward the basement door. As soon as he disappeared, Jasmine moved. She didn't run. She moved with efficient purpose. She walked to the kitchen island where his laptop sat open. I leaned closer to my screen, urging her on. Faster, Jasmine. Faster. She reached into her pocket. She pulled out the silver drive. She plugged it into the USB port on the side of the machine. I counted the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. On the screen, I saw her staring at the drive, waiting for the light. 4, 5. The basement door handle rattled. Connor was coming back. Pull it, I whispered to the empty room. Pull it now. Jasmine yanked the drive out and shoved it into her pocket just as Connor walked back into the kitchen. Nothing wrong with the heater, he grumbled. You probably just heard the pipes settling. This old house is falling apart. Jasmine smiled at him. Thanks for checking, honey. You are the best. She walked out of the kitchen and up the stairs. I slumped back in my chair, wiping sweat from my forehead. She had done it. She was a natural. 10 minutes later, Jasmine came back into my room. She was shaking again, but this time it was from adrenaline. Did it work? She asked, breathless. I turned to my computer monitor. A new window had popped up, a black screen with scrolling green text. Connection established. Target acquired. It worked, I said. We are in. We spent the rest of the morning watching the data roll in. It was like reading the diary of a madman. We saw his emails to the loan sharks begging for more time. We saw his texts to Sarah promising that the big payday was days away. But then we saw something that made my blood run cold. Connor logged into a brokerage account. It was the account that held the majority of my company stock. The stock I had transferred to him, temporarily, via the guardianship papers. He wasn't just managing it. He was setting up a sell order. Liquidation. Jasmine whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. He is selling everything. I looked at the numbers. He was dumping the stock at market price. He didn't care about the value. He didn't care that dumping that much stock would crash the company price and put hundreds of my employees out of work. He just wanted the cash. $10 million. That was the estimated payout. And then he opened another tab. An airline website. I watched as he selected a flight. Chicago to Rio de Janeiro. One way. 2 tickets. Departure date Monday night. Monday night, Jasmine said. That is the day of the closing. He plans to sell the house in the morning, finalize the stock sale in the afternoon, and be on a plane by evening, I said. He is clearing us out, Jasmine. He is leaving us with nothing, not even the walls around us. And look, I said, pointing to the second ticket. Passenger name, Sarah Hilt. Jasmine stared at the name. The woman who was supposed to be his sister. The woman who was actually his wife. He is taking her, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. He is taking my money and running away with his wife. And leaving you with the debt, I added. Look at the liability clause on the stock sale. He set it up so the tax burden falls on you. Jasmine stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at the garden where Mr. Henderson used to work. She looked at the gray sky. He is not going to Rio, she said. No, I agreed. He is not. She turned back to me. Her eyes were dry. Her jaw was set. She looked exactly like her mother used to look when she was about to make a hard decision. What do we do, Dad? We let him think he is won, I said. We let him hit the button. What? If we stop him now, it is attempted fraud, I explained. He gets a slap on the wrist. But if we let him execute the trade, if we let him sign the closing papers on the house, then it is federal grand larceny. It is wire fraud. It is money laundering. But the money, Jasmine said. If he transfers it? He cannot transfer it, I said, tapping my temple. Because the moment he hits execute, the bank's security protocol, the one I triggered with my signature, will freeze the transaction. It will look like it went through on his screen, but the money will go into a holding account controlled by the FBI. You called the FBI, she asked. Vance called them this morning, I said. They are waiting for him to make the move. They need him to commit the act. So we have to wait, Jasmine said, pacing the room. We have to live with him for 2 more days, knowing he is planning to destroy us. Yes, I said, and you have to be perfect, Jasmine. You have to help him pack. You have to talk about the new apartment he promised to buy us. You have to ask him what he wants for dinner. You have to be the loving wife until the very last second. Can you do it? I asked. Jasmine looked at the screen where Connor was now looking at photos of luxury villas in Brazil. She looked at the bruise on her face in the reflection of the monitor. I can do it, she said. I will help him pack. I will even iron his shirts. I want him to look good for his mugshot. That is my girl, I said. We sat there for a moment, watching the man who had tried to break us. He was humming to himself, clicking through pictures of beaches and cocktails. He had no idea that the laptop he was using was broadcasting his every thought to the victims he despised. We are not just father and daughter anymore, Jasmine said quietly. No, I said, taking her hand. We are partners. And Connor Hilt was about to find out that the Thorne family business wasn't architecture, it was justice, and business was about to be very good. Sunday morning arrived with a deceptive brightness, the kind of sharp, clear light that usually signals the beginning of a heat wave, but inside the Thorne residence the temperature was already at boiling point. We were living in a suspended reality. To the outside world, we were a happy, multi-generational family enjoying a lazy weekend breakfast. To the cameras recording silently in the ceiling, we were a tragedy in 3 acts. And to me and my daughter Jasmine, we were soldiers synchronizing our watches before the final assault. Connor was in a mood that I can only describe as manic euphoria. He had spent the night dreaming of Rio and wake up believing he was already a king. He walked into the kitchen wearing a silk robe that he had bought with my credit card, whistling a tune that grated against my nerves like sandpaper on glass. He poured himself a mimosa, not bothering to offer one to anyone else, and leaned against the counter with a smile that showed too many teeth. Silas Jasmine, he announced, his voice booming. I have had an epiphany. I looked up from my newspaper, my reading glasses perched on the end of my nose. I made sure my hands had a slight tremor as I turned the page. What is it, Connor? I asked, my voice rasping with feigned age. Tomorrow is my 31st birthday, he said. And it is also the day the sale of the house goes through, and it is the day the stock transfer finalizes. It is a trifecta, a alignment of the stars. We cannot just let a day like that pass with a quiet dinner. Jasmine looked up from the stove where she was making pancakes. She froze for a second, her spatula hovering over the batter. I caught her eye. Play the part, I signaled with a slight nod. What did you have in mind, honey? She asked, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. A party. Connor declared, spreading his arms wide. A gala. Here. Tomorrow night. I put down my paper. A party, I repeated. But Connor, we are packing. The house is half in boxes. And I am not feeling up to a crowd. Connor waved his hand dismissively. We will clear the boxes from the main hall. We will hire a catering crew. I want to invite the partners, the investors, the board members. I want to announce the transition of power properly. I want them to see that the company is in good hands, young hands. He walked over to the table and picked up an apple, tossing it in the air and catching it. Besides, it will be a farewell to the old house, a final hurrah before the bulldozers come. Don't you want to say goodbye to your masterpiece, Silas? The cruelty of the man was bottomless. He wanted to invite the business world to watch him dance on my grave. He wanted to parade me around like a trophy, a senile old lion that he had personally tamed. He wanted to announce that he owned my life in the very room where I had raised my family. I looked at Jasmine. She was gripping the handle of the frying pan so hard her knuckles were white. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell him that there would be no transition of power, only a transition to a jail cell. But I saw an opportunity. If he wanted an audience, I would give him an audience. If he wanted the board of directors and the investors to be present, then he was saving me the trouble of sending them the evidence. He was gathering the witnesses for his own execution. I slowly took off my glasses and polished them on my sweater. I let a slow, resigned smile spread across my face. You know, Connor, I said softly. You are right. He stopped tossing the apple. I am. Yes. It is a big day, a historic day. If you are going to take the helm of the company, you should do it with style. You should show them that you are a leader. Connor beamed. Exactly, Silas. I knew you would understand. It is about optics. Invite them all, I said, my voice growing stronger. Invite the board. Invite the bankers. Invite your friend Dr. Evans. And invite your sister, Sarah. She should be here for your big moment. Connor hesitated for a split second when I mentioned Sarah. I saw the calculation behind his eyes. He was wondering if it was risky to have his wife and his mistress in the same room. But his arrogance won out. He wanted Sarah to see him triumph. He wanted to show her the spoils of war. I will call her, he said. I think she might be feeling well enough to travel. Good, I said. Make it grand, Connor. Spare no expense. After all, it is only money. He laughed. That is the spirit, old man. He spent the next hour making calls. I listened from the living room as he charmed and cajoled. He ordered cases of Dom Perignon. He hired a high-end sushi chef. He booked a string quartet. He was burning through my money with the reckless abandon of a man who thought the well was bottomless. Jasmine came into the living room, her phone in her hand. She sat next to me on the sofa. He is inviting everyone, Dad, she whispered. The entire board. The top 3 investors. Even the mayor might come. Good, I said, staring at the fireplace. Let them come. But the embarrassment, Jasmine said. When the police come in front of all those people, it will be a scandal. The company reputation. The reputation is already damaged. Jasmine, I said, he has been draining funds. The only way to restore faith is to show the world that we cut out the cancer ourselves. Publicly, surgically. When they see us take him down, they won't see a victim. They will see strength. They will see that the Thorne family does not suffer fools. She nodded, taking a deep breath. He wants me to make a speech. He wants me to toast him as the new CEO. You will, I said. You will raise your glass, you will smile, and you will tell everyone how talented he is, how surprising he is. I don't know if I can do it, she said, her voice breaking. You can, I said, because I have a plan for the entertainment. Connor walked back into the room, his face flushed with excitement. It is all set. 50 guests, 7 p.m. Start time, and I have arranged for a photographer. I want this documented. A photographer, I asked. Yes. I want a picture of the moment I sign the closing papers. We will do it as a ceremonial thing during the party. A passing of the torch. I gripped my cane. He wanted to make the theft of my home a photo opportunity. Connor, I said, leaning forward, since you are doing all this planning, since you are honoring the family legacy, I want to contribute something. He looked at me with that patronizing smirk. You don't have to do anything, Silas. Just put on a nice suit and try not to drool. I chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. I can do that. But I also have a gift for you. A birthday gift. Connor raised an eyebrow. He looked at my empty hands. He probably thought I had bought him a watch or a set of golf clubs. Something safe. Something boring. You didn't have to do that, Silas, I insisted. I have been working on it for a while. It is a digital presentation, a retrospective of your time with the family. Since you are taking over the future, I thought we should honor the path that brought you here. Connor's ego swelled visibly. He loved the idea. A tribute, a video montage of his greatness. That actually sounds nice, Silas, he said, sounding surprised. A video tribute. I like it. We can project it on the big wall in the ballroom, right before the toast. Exactly, I said. I will set up the projector myself. I may be old, but I still know how to run a presentation. Don't mess it up, he warned playfully. I want it to look professional. It will be very professional, I promised. It will be the most memorable video you have ever seen. He walked away humming, heading upstairs to pick out his outfit. Jasmine looked at me, her eyes wide. Dad? The video. Are you going to... I put a finger to my lips. I am going to give him exactly what he asked for, I whispered. A retrospective, a detailed high-definition history of his time in this house. But Dad, she said, if he sees you setting up the equipment... He won't care, I said. He sees me as a servant. He sees me as tech support. He is so blinded by his own reflection that he won't notice that the projector is connected to my secure server, not a flash drive of family photos. The rest of the day was a blur of activity. The catering crew arrived and started setting up in the kitchen. They pushed my furniture against the walls. They covered my tables with white linen. They transformed my home into a stage. I sat in the corner watching. I felt like a spy in enemy territory. Every time Connor walked by, he would give me a little nod, a gesture of ownership. Don't worry, Silas, he said at one point. We will keep a chair for you in the corner so you don't get tired. You can watch the fun from the sidelines. I smiled. Thank you, Connor. You are too kind. The sidelines. That is where he thought I belonged. He didn't know that the coach calls the plays from the sidelines. By evening, the house was unrecognizable. It was sleek cold and ready for a party. The smell of expensive appetizers filled the air. I went up to my room to dress. I opened my closet and pushed aside the cardigans and the slacks that Connor liked to see me wear. I reached into the back and pulled out my old tuxedo. It was a bespoke suit cut for me in London 20 years ago. It was a suit of armor. I put it on. It was a little loose around the waist. Stress will do that to a man, but the shoulders still fit. I tied my bow tie with steady hands. I looked in the mirror. The man looking back at me wasn't a victim. He wasn't a senile invalid. He was Silas Thorne, architect, father, survivor. I picked up my cane, not for support but for style. I walked over to the desk and checked the server one last time. The file was queued up. It was labeled Connor's Birthday Tribute. Inside were the recordings of the safe cracking, the recordings of the phone calls to Sarah, the video of the pill swapping, the audio of him mocking my race. It was a masterpiece of editing, a documentary of a sociopath. I checked the time. It was Monday morning, the day of the party, the day of the flight. I went to Jasmine's room. She was dressed in a stunning black gown, but her face was pale. She was putting makeup over the bruise on her cheek. You look beautiful, I said, standing in the doorway. She turned. She looked at my tuxedo. You look dangerous, Dad. I am dangerous, I said. She stood up and took my arm. Are you sure about this? Once we start the video, there is no going back. He will destroy us if it fails. It won't fail, I said. The truth is a heavy hammer, Jasmine. When it swings, it hits hard. We walked down the stairs together. The caterers were lighting the candles. The string quartet was tuning their instruments. Connor came out of the library. He was wearing a white dinner jacket. He looked like a movie star. He saw us and stopped. He looked surprised to see me looking so sharp, but he recovered quickly. Well, look at you two, he said, spreading his arms. The supporting cast is ready. He walked over and kissed Jasmine on the unbruised cheek. Happy birthday to me, he whispered. Then he looked at me. Do you have the gift ready, Silas? I patted the pocket of my tuxedo where the remote control for the projector sat. Oh yes, I said, my voice smooth and cold as ice. I have the gift right here, Connor, and I promise you it is going to bring the house down. Literally or figuratively, he laughed. Both, I thought. Let's get this party started, I said aloud. He turned and walked toward the door, ready to greet his guests, ready to accept their adoration, ready to be crowned king. I watched him go. "Enjoy the music, Connor," I whispered, because the silence that comes after it is going to be deafening. The guests began to arrive. The doorbell rang, the laughter started, the champagne corks popped, the stage was set, the actors were in place, and the trapdoor was oiled and ready to spring. The ballroom of my home had been transformed into a theater of excess. Connor had spared no expense using my credit cards to turn the sanctuary of my life into a spectacle of his vanity. Crystal chandeliers that Bernice and I had chosen together were now draped with modern streamers that looked cheap despite their price tag. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the murmur of 50 wealthy guests who were drinking my champagne and waiting to see the old lion finally lie down and die. I stood in the shadows near the kitchen entrance, my tuxedo blending into the dark wood paneling. I gripped my cane not because I needed it, but because it anchored me. It was the only thing keeping me from trembling, not with fear, but with the sheer adrenaline of the hunter who has finally cornered the wolf. Connor was in his element. He moved through the crowd like a shark through a school of fish. He was charming, he was magnetic, and he was utterly soulless. He shook hands with the board members, men I had known for 30 years, men who were now looking at him with respect because they thought he was the future. They didn't know they were shaking hands with a corpse. And there was Sarah. She was standing near the bar wearing a dress that was too red and too tight for a business gathering. She was playing the role of the wealthy investor from Denver. But I saw the way her eyes darted around the room, assessing the value of the paintings and the silverware. She wasn't an investor. She was an appraiser. And she was calculating her cut of the loot. Jasmine stood by the fireplace. She was a statue of ice. Her makeup covered the bruise on her cheek, but it couldn't cover the cold fire in her eyes. She was smiling, but it was a smile that didn't touch her soul. It was the smile of an executioner waiting for the signal. She caught my eye across the room and gave a barely perceptible nod. The stage was set. The string quartet faded out and a hush fell over the room. Connor stepped up onto the small raised platform that had been erected in front of the main projector screen. He tapped the microphone. The sound echoed through the high ceilings. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth and confident. "Thank you all for coming tonight. This is a special evening, a night of celebration, a night of transition." He paused, looking out at the crowd with a benevolent smile. "For 40 years, this house and the company behind it have been symbols of stability. Silas Thorne built a legacy that we all admire. But as with all great things, there comes a time for evolution, a time to pass the torch to a new generation with the energy and the vision to take us into the next century." He gestured toward me. A spotlight one he had arranged swung around and hit me in the face. I blinked, acting the part of the confused old man. "Silas," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "My father-in-law, a giant in his time. But even giants need to rest. Tonight we celebrate his retirement, and we celebrate the future." The crowd clapped politely. I saw pity in their eyes. They saw a frail old man being put out to pasture. They didn't see the man who had designed the very foundations they were standing on. Connor continued. "Tomorrow I will officially take over as CEO of Thorne Architecture. We have big plans, global expansion, modernization, and yes, we will be saying goodbye to this beautiful old house. It has served its purpose, but we need to look forward, not backward." Sarah raised her glass from the back of the room, a silent toast to their victory. "And to mark this occasion," Connor said, "I wanted to share a little video tribute, a look back at the history that brought us here. But first, I want to invite my beautiful wife Jasmine to join me." Jasmine walked up the steps. She moved with a grace that was terrifying. She stood next to him and he wrapped his arm around her waist, squeezing her tight, a display of ownership. "She looks happy, doesn't she?" Connor said to the crowd. "We are all so happy." That was the cue. I stepped out of the shadows. I didn't shuffle. I didn't limp. I walked with the long, powerful strides of a man who had walked construction sites in the dead of winter. The cane tapped against the floor with a rhythmic, authoritative click. Connor saw me approaching. He frowned slightly. This wasn't in the script. I was supposed to stay in the corner and wave. "Silas," he said, his voice tight, "why don't you stay there? We will bring the cake to you later." I ignored him. I walked straight to the stairs of the platform. The guests parted for me, murmuring, They sensed a change in the air. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I walked up the steps. I stood next to Connor. He was tall, but I was a thorn, and when I stood up straight, I towered over him. I reached out and took the microphone from his hand. He was so shocked he let go. "Thank you, Connor," I said, my voice booming through the speakers. It was not the voice of a senile man. It was the voice of the CEO. Deep, resonant, commanding. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw the board members straighten up. I saw Dr. Evans shift uncomfortably near the buffet. Connor laughed nervously. "Okay, Silas. You want to say a few words? That is sweet. But let's keep it brief. We have a schedule." He reached for the microphone to take it back. "No," I said. I didn't shout. I just said the word with the weight of a falling anvil. Connor's smile faltered. "Give me the mic, Silas." "You are confusing people." He reached out aggressively this time, grabbing my arm. Suddenly, 2 men in black suits stepped out from behind the curtain behind the stage. They weren't the venue security Connor had hired. They were my men, ex-military. Men who had guarded my sights in the roughest neighborhoods of Chicago. They moved with a speed that blurred. One of them intercepted Connor's hand, gripping his wrist with a force that made Connor gasp. The other stepped between us, his chest like a wall of granite. "What the hell?" Connor shouted, pulling his arm back. "Who are these guys?" "Security," I said calmly. "My security." The room went deadly silent. The string quartet stopped halfway through a note. Connor looked at the bodyguards, then at me. His face flushed red. "This is my party, Silas. Get off the stage. You are making a scene. You are having an episode. Dr. Evans." He pointed to the doctor in the crowd. "Evans, get up here. He is delusional." Dr. Evans took a step forward but stopped when he saw the third bodyguard step out from the kitchen, blocking his path. I turned back to the crowd. I adjusted my bow tie. I looked at Sarah, who had lowered her glass, her eyes narrowing. She knew. A con artist recognizes the smell of a trap before anyone else. I smiled. A real smile. "I am sorry for the interruption, everyone," I said. "My son-in-law talks about transition. He talks about the future. And he is right. Tonight is about the future. But before we get there, we need to clear up the past." I turned to look at Connor. He was rubbing his wrist, staring at me with a mixture of fear and rage. He looked like a child who had just realized the monster under the bed was real. Connor spoke about a tribute, I continued, a video to honor the family, and I agreed. I prepared the video myself. Connor's eyes widened. He remembered the projector. He remembered that I had set it up. He started to piece it together. "Silas, don't," he warned, his voice dropping to a hiss. "If you embarrass me..." I ignored him. I looked at Jasmine. She stepped back, giving me the center stage. But as I was editing the footage, I said, addressing the guests again, I realized something. We often look at photos, but we don't really see them. We see the smiles, we see the clothes, we see the celebration. But we miss the details, the little things in the background, the reflections in the glass. I paused. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. 1 month ago, I received a phone call from our wedding photographer. He told me he had found something disturbing in the wedding photos. Something that changed the way I see my son-in-law, and something that changed the way I see the future of this company. Connor lunged. "Cut the power," he screamed at the technician in the back. "Cut it now." But the technician didn't move. He was looking at the bodyguard standing next to him. "Connor, this is insane," he yelled. "This is dementia. Don't listen to him." I pressed the button on the remote control in my pocket. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. The massive screen behind us flickered to life. "Today," I said, my voice cold and hard as steel, "I want to re-show my daughter's beautiful wedding photos, because there are details we missed, and there are truths that can no longer hide in the shadows." Connor stood frozen. He looked at the screen. He looked at the exit. But the doors were closed. The bodyguards were in position. The trap was sprung. "Sit down, Connor," I said. "The show is just beginning." And for the first time in his life, Connor Hilt did exactly what I told him. He sank onto the stool behind him, his face the color of ash as the first image appeared on the screen, towering over him like a judgment from God. The first image hit the screen with the silence of a held breath, followed immediately by the collective gasp of 50 people. It was the photo Benny had shown me in the studio, the one taken at the wedding reception. At first glance, it was romantic, just Connor kissing Jasmine's temple. But then I zoomed in using the remote. The reflection in the window grew larger, pixelated but undeniable. The smartphone screen, the text message to the shark. Fish has bitten the hook. The old man will sign within 3 months. Start preparing the nursing home. I watched Connor's face. The color drained from his skin so fast it looked like his blood had simply evaporated. He stood up, knocking his stool over. "That is fake," he shouted, his voice cracking. "That is Photoshop. He is making it up. He is jealous." I did not answer him. I simply pressed the button again. The screen changed. This time it was a video. The timestamp in the corner read Tuesday, 7:15 a.m. It was the kitchen footage. The guests watched in horrified fascination as Connor Hilt, the man who had just shook their hands, walked to the counter. They watched him open my pill organizer. They watched him dump my life-saving heart medication into the garbage disposal. They heard the crunch of the grinder, and they watched him replace the pills with sugar tablets. A woman in the front row put her hand over her mouth. One of the board members, a man I had known for 20 years, stood up, his face dark with anger. "You tried to kill him," the board member whispered. "It wasn't just greed," I said into the microphone, my voice calm and terrible. "It was a calculated medical crisis. He swapped my medication for sugar, and then he waited for me to fall. And when I did fall, he took me to a doctor he had bought and paid for." I looked at Dr. Evans. He was trying to inch toward the exit, but my security guard stepped in his path, crossing his massive arms. Evans looked like he was about to vomit. Connor was shaking his head frantically. "No. No. It was a mistake. I was organizing his pills. I was helping him." I pressed the button again. The video cut to black, but the audio remained. It was the recording from the night of the party. The sound was crystal clear. The bass of the music thumped in the background, but Connor's voice cut through it like a knife. He earned it so I could burn it. Cheers to affirmative action. He stacked the bricks so a white boy from the suburbs could take the keys. The room went cold. The temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees in a second. The wealthy investors, the partners, the people who had laughed with him that night suddenly looked down at their shoes. They realized they were hearing their own laughter on the tape. They realized they had been complicit in mocking a man who was standing right in front of them with more dignity than they would ever possess. Connor looked at the crowd. He looked for an ally. He looked for anyone who would stand up for him. But there was no one. He was alone on an island of his own making. "You are taking it out of context," he stammered, sweat pouring down his forehead. "It was a joke. We were just blowing off steam. Silas, you know I respect you." "Respect?" I asked. "Is that what you call it when you plan to sell my house and throw me in a state facility? Is that what you call it when you hit my daughter?" I pointed the remote at the screen one last time. "But none of that matters, Connor," I said. "The theft, the attempted murder, the racism, those are all crimes against me, and I am an old man. I can take it." I took a step closer to him. "But you made a mistake, son. You committed a crime against my daughter. You broke her heart. And for that, there is no mercy." I clicked the remote. The screen filled with a document. It was not a text message. It was not a video. It was a high-resolution scan of a marriage certificate from the state of Nevada dated 5 years ago. The names on the certificate were clear enough to be read from the back of the room. Conrad Hilt and Sarah Miller. I turned to look at Sarah. She was standing by the bar, her face a mask of terror. She had dropped her champagne glass. It lay shattered on the floor, a pile of glittering shards in a puddle of expensive wine. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, "you all know Sarah as the investor from Denver. Connor introduced her to us as his sister. But according to the state of Nevada, she is actually his wife." The gasp this time was louder. It was a shockwave. "He is not a bachelor," I continued. "He never was. His marriage to my daughter Jasmine is void. It is bigamy. It is a lie. He brought his wife into my home, he had her sit at my table, and he planned to run away with her using the money he stole from my company." Connor looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at the door. "It is a lie," Connor screamed, pointing at the screen. "That is a forgery. I divorced her years ago." "There are no divorce papers, Connor," I said. "My investigator checked every courthouse in the country. You are still married. Which means every document you signed as Jasmine's husband is fraud. Every check you cashed is theft. And every night you spent in this house was a felony." Connor looked at Jasmine. She was standing at the edge of the stage. She wasn't crying. She was watching him with the cold, detached curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen under a microscope. "Jasmine, baby," he pleaded, stepping toward her. You know me, you know I love you. He is crazy. He forged all of this. Tell them we are happy." Jasmine didn't move. She didn't blink. Connor's eyes darted around the room. He saw the board members pulling out their phones, probably calling their lawyers. He saw the bodyguards blocking the main exit. He saw the walls closing in. The realization hit him. The game was over. The money was gone. The Rio flight would never happen. The penthouse was a fantasy. He snapped. The charming facade cracked and fell away, leaving only the desperate, cornered animal beneath. "I am not staying here for this," he yelled. "I am not listening to this senile old lunatic." He lunged. Not toward me, but toward the side door, the servants' entrance that led to the kitchen and the garage. He thought it was unguarded. He moved fast, fueled by panic and adrenaline. He jumped off the stage, knocking over a flower arrangement. He sprinted past the stunned guests, pushing a waiter to the ground. "Out of my way," he screamed. He reached the door. He grabbed the handle. He thought he was free, but the door didn't open. Standing in front of it, blocking the handle with her body, was Jasmine. She hadn't moved to save him. She had moved to stop him. Connor skid to a halt, his chest heaving. "Move, Jasmine," he snarled. "Move, or I swear to God." "You swear to God what?" Jasmine asked, her voice calm, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You will hit me again, like you did on Tuesday." Connor raised his hand. The threat was instinctive, but Jasmine didn't flinch. She stood tall in her black gown, a queen protecting her castle. "Go ahead," she said. "Hit me. Do it in front of 50 witnesses. Do it in front of the cameras. Add assault to the list, Connor. Make it a life sentence." Connor's hand hovered in the air. He looked at her face, the face he had caressed, and slapped the face he had lied to for years. He saw no fear. He saw only judgment. He lowered his hand. He looked back at me. I was standing on the stage, leaning on my cane, watching him. "It is over, Connor," I said. "The police are already in the driveway. The FBI has the transaction logs from the stock sale you tried to execute this morning. You didn't sell the company, Connor. You just confessed to wire fraud." The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder with every second. Blue and red lights flashed against the ballroom windows, painting the room in the colors of the law. Connor slumped against the door. He slid down until he was sitting on the floor, his white dinner jacket stained with the wine he had spilled. He put his head in his hands. Sarah tried to slip out the front door during the distraction, but my head of security was waiting for her. He gently but firmly took her by the arm. "You will want to stay for the party, ma'am," he said. "The police will have questions for the happy couple." I walked down the stairs of the stage. The guests parted for me like the Red Sea. They looked at me with a new expression. Not pity, fear, and respect. They realized that the old lion hadn't lost his teeth. He had just been sharpening them. I walked over to Jasmine. She was still standing by the door, looking down at the man who had ruined her life. I put my hand on her shoulder. "You did good, warrior," I whispered. She looked at me, and for the first time that night a real tear escaped her eye. "It is done," she said. "Yes," I said. "It is done." The front doors burst open. 6 police officers marched in, followed by 2 agents in FBI windbreakers. I pointed my cane at Connor, huddled on the floor. "That is him, officer," I said. "The man who tried to steal a legacy." As they pulled Connor to his feet and clicked the handcuffs around his wrists, he looked at me one last time. His eyes were empty, dead things. "You planned this," he whispered. "You planned the whole thing." I leaned in close so only he could hear. "I am an architect, Connor," I said. "I don't plan, I design. And I just designed your cage." The handcuffs were tight around Connor's wrists, but his mouth was still running a mile a minute. He was a drowning man who believed he could talk the water into letting him breathe. He scrambled to his knees, his face twisted into a mask of desperate arrogance that was painful to watch. He looked at the police officers, he looked at the FBI agents, and then he looked at me with eyes that burned with a mixture of hatred and delusion. "You cannot do this," he screamed, his voice cracking and echoing off the high ceilings of the ballroom. "I am the legal guardian. I have the power of attorney. I have the papers signed by him. I am the CEO of Thorn Architecture. This is a hostile takeover. This is kidnapping. I demand to see my lawyer." He looked around the room, searching for validation from the board members who were now staring at him like he was a contagious disease. "Tell them," he shouted at the chairman of the board. "Tell them I have the signature. You saw the documents. You saw the medical report. I am in charge here." I stood on the steps of the stage, leaning casually on my cane. I waited for him to finish. I waited for the echo of his screaming to die down until the only sound in the room was the hum of the projector fan cooling down. Then I nodded to the back of the room. "Mr. Vance," I said softly, "if you would be so kind." Vance stepped out from the shadows. He had been standing there the whole time, a silent sentinel in a gray wool suit holding a battered leather briefcase that he had carried since the Reagan administration. Vance walked through the crowd with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who knows he holds the aces. He didn't look at Connor. He walked straight to the police officers and held up a hand, signaling them to pause. Vance placed his briefcase on a cocktail table. The click of the latches opening sounded like gunshots in the quiet room. Mr. Hilt Vance began, his voice dry as dust. "You keep mentioning these signatures. You keep claiming you have legal authority over Mr. Thorne's assets and his company." "I do," Connor spat, struggling against the officer's grip. "I have the durable power of attorney, signed 3 days ago. It is ironclad." Vance pulled a document from his briefcase. He held it up to the light. "You mean this document?" he asked. "That is it," Connor yelled. "That is my ticket. Read it. It gives me full control." Vance adjusted his glasses. He looked at the document. Then he looked at Connor with a pitying expression that was far worse than anger. "Mr. Hilt, you are a financial advisor. You pride yourself on your attention to detail, yet you seem to have missed a very critical detail regarding Mr. Thorne's signature." Connor froze. "What are you talking about?" Vance turned the document around so Connor could see it. He pointed a long, bony finger at the bottom of the page. "Mr. Thorne has 2 signatures on file with the bank and the firm's legal department," Vance explained. "One is his standard operating signature. The other is what we call a duress protocol." I stepped forward. "When I signed those papers for you, Connor," I said, my voice low and steady. I omitted my middle initial, and I placed a small dot after my last name. Connor squinted at the paper. His eyes widened. "To the untrained eye, it looks like a slip of the pen," Vance continued. "But to the bank's fraud algorithm, it triggers an immediate lockdown. That signature does not grant you power, Mr. Hilt. It acts as a sworn affidavit that the signer is being coerced. It renders this document not only void, but evidence of a felony." Connor's mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. "Void," he whispered. "But that is not the worst news for you," Vance said, reaching back into his briefcase. "Even if the signature were valid, even if you had successfully tricked the bank, you would still be holding an empty bag." Vance pulled out a thick blue folder. "You see, Mr. Hilt, 6 months ago, when Mr. Thorne first suspected that his son-in-law might be, shall we say, ethically compromised, he instructed me to restructure his assets." I watched Connor's face. He was trying to do the math. 6 months. That was before the pill swapping, before the gaslighting, before he thought the game had even started. "We created an irrevocable blind trust," Vance said. "The Bernice Thorne Charity Trust. 6 months ago, Mr. Thorne transferred the deed to this house, the patent rights to his architectural designs, and 98% of his liquid capital into that trust." Connor shook his head. "No, that is impossible. I saw the accounts. I saw the balances on the screen this morning." "You saw a mirror site," Vance said, allowing himself a tiny smile. "You were looking at a ghost account, Mr. Hilt, a simulation we set up to keep you complacent. The real money was moved to a secure offshore holding meant for building schools and libraries. It has been out of your reach since last spring." Connor slumped. His legs gave out and the officers had to hold him up. "The millions, the Rio money, the fortune he had married my daughter for, it was all gone. It had never really been there. So I get nothing." He croaked, his voice barely audible. "I am just broke." "Oh no," Vance said, closing the briefcase. "It is much worse than that. You are not just broke, Mr. Hilt, you are indebted." I walked down the final step and stood right in front of him. This was the moment. The payoff. "Do you remember last week, Connor?" I asked. "Do you remember when you insisted on restructuring the company to prepare for your takeover? You created a new holding company. Hilt Global, you called it, and you merged it with my old company." Connor nodded slowly. "Yeah, to consolidate the tax liability." "Correct," I said. "And do you remember signing the assumption of liability agreement? You were so eager to put your name on the door, you didn't read the fine print, did you?" Vance held up one final document. It was the one Connor had signed with a flourish just 5 days ago. The entity you took control of, Vance said, is a shell corporation. Mr. Thorne transferred the healthy assets to the trust, but he left the toxic liabilities in the original company. Specifically a $5 million loan taken out in the 80s for a project that went bust plus 30 years of accrued interest and penalties. Vance leaned in. When you signed this merger, Mr. Hilt, you personally guaranteed that debt. You didn't just inherit a company. You inherited a $5 million bill, and since the company has no assets, the bank will come for you. Connor looked at me. His eyes were wide with horror. $5 million, he whispered. Personally guaranteed, I repeated. That means they will take everything, Connor. They will take your car. They will take your watch. They will take your future earnings. Even when you get out of prison, you will be working for the rest of your life just to pay the interest on a debt you stole from me. I leaned closer, my face inches from his. You wanted my legacy, Connor. You wanted what I built. Well, part of building is carrying the load. I carried that debt for 30 years. It was heavy. And now, it is yours. Connor let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a sob. It was the sound of a soul breaking. He looked at Sarah. Sarah, help me, he pleaded. We can fight this. You have money. The Denver accounts. Sarah looked at him with cold, dead eyes. The police officer holding her tightened his grip. You idiot, she hissed. I don't have any money. I was waiting for your payout. Connor looked back at me. He looked at the luxury he had surrounded himself with. The champagne, the caviar, the white dinner jacket. It was all a costume for a play that had ended in a tragedy. I turned to the police officer. Officer, I think he is ready to go now. Be careful with him. He is worth negative $5 million. The officers dragged him toward the door. Connor didn't fight anymore. The fight had left him. He dragged his feet, his expensive Italian shoes scuffing the floor. As he passed Jasmine, she didn't look away. She watched him go. Jasmine, he called out, weak and pathetic. Jasmine, please. She took a sip of her champagne. Goodbye, Connor, she said. Good luck with the debt. The doors closed behind him. The flashing blue lights painted the walls for a moment longer and then faded as the cruisers drove away. The room was silent. 50 guests stood frozen, holding their breath. They had come for a party. They had witnessed an execution. I turned to Vance. Thank you, old friend, I said, shaking his hand. Vance nodded, snapping the locks on his briefcase shut. Always a pleasure, Silas. I will send the foreclosure notice to his cell. I looked at the crowd. They were waiting for me to speak. They were waiting for the old man to explain himself. But I didn't need to explain. I walked over to the projector and pulled the plug. The screen went dark. The evidence of Connor's crimes vanished, leaving only the truth of the aftermath. I walked over to the bar and poured myself a glass of water. My hand was steady, perfectly steady. The show is over, everyone, I said calmly. Please feel free to finish the champagne. I paid for it after all. And then I turned my back on them and walked toward my daughter. We had a company to rebuild. We had a garden to replant. And for the first time in a long time, the air in my house tasted clean. It tasted like freedom, and it tasted like justice. The ballroom was a sea of blue uniforms, and the air that had smelled of expensive perfume just moments ago now smelled of sweat and fear. The arrival of the police was not a polite knock on the door, it was an invasion. They moved with the heavy tactical precision of men who knew exactly who they were looking for, and they did not care about the silk table runners or the crystal glasses. I stood on the bottom step of the stage watching the chaotic ballet of justice unfold. It was a scene I had designed in my head 1,000 times over the last 3 months, but seeing it in reality was visceral. It was the physical manifestation of consequence. Connor was still on his knees where he had collapsed. When the first officer laid a hand on his shoulder, he flinched as if he had been burned. The arrogance that had defined him, the swagger that he wore like a second skin, had evaporated completely, leaving behind a shivering, terrified child. Get up, the officer barked, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the stunned guests. Connor. Hilt, you are under arrest. Connor scrambled to his feet, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. He looked around the room, his eyes wide and frantic, searching for an exit that didn't exist. He looked at the board members, he looked at the investors, he looked at the people he had spent the evening trying to impress. Tell them, he shouted, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeal. Tell them this is a mistake. I am the CEO. I am the owner of this property. You cannot arrest me in my own house. The officer spun him around and slammed him against the wall next to the projector screen. The sound of his body hitting the plaster echoed through the room, making the guests flinch. You have the right to remain silent. The officer recited the words flowing with practiced indifference. I will not be silent, Connor screamed, struggling against the arm pinning him to the wall. What am I being charged with? I demand to know the charges. This is harassment. This is racial profiling against a white man in a black neighborhood. The officer pulled a folded warrant from his vest. He held it up so Connor could see the seal of the court. You are being charged with 3 counts of wire fraud. The officer read his tone flat. 1 count of bigamy, and 1 count of attempted aggravated assault with intent to cause bodily harm regarding the tampering of prescription medication belonging to Mr. Silas Thorne. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Attempted aggravated assault. That was the legal term for trying to kill an old man with sugar pills. Connor's face went slack. The fight drained out of him. He looked at me. I was standing 10 feet away, watching him with the impassive gaze of a judge. He set me up, Connor whispered. He is the criminal. He recorded me without my consent. That evidence was obtained legally under the emergency provisions of the trust, the officer said, tightening the handcuffs. A sharp metallic click signaled the end of Connor's freedom. Across the room, another drama was unfolding. Sarah, the woman who had played the role of the wealthy investor, was trying to make herself small. She was edging toward the French doors that led to the garden, hoping to slip away into the night while everyone was focused on Connor. But she didn't make it. 2 officers stepped in front of her, blocking her path. Ms. Sarah Miller, the officer asked, or do you prefer Mrs. Hilt? Sarah froze. She smoothed her red dress, her hands trembling. I don't know what you are talking about, she said, her voice shrill. I am just a guest. I am an investor from Denver. I have nothing to do with this man's business. The officer didn't blink. We have your flight itinerary for tonight, ma'am. One way to Rio de Janeiro, booked on a credit card linked to the fraudulent transfer of Thorne Architecture stocks. You are listed as a co-conspirator. Please, Sarah begged, her mask of sophistication crumbling. I didn't do anything. He made me do it. He told me it was his money. I am a victim here. Put your hands behind your back, the officer ordered. Sarah let out a sob. A loud, ugly sound of self-pity. She looked at Connor, who was being dragged toward the center of the room. You idiot, she screamed at him. You told me it was a sure thing. You told me the old man was senile. You ruined everything. Connor looked at her, his eyes dead. Shut up, Sarah, he muttered. Just shut up. The officers marched them both toward the front door. The guests, the elite of Chicago, parted like the Red Sea. They stared at the handcuffs. They stared at the tear-stained faces of the couple who had toasted their own success just an hour ago. The shame in the room was palpable. It wasn't just Connor's shame. It was the collective shame of everyone who had believed him, everyone who had dismissed me, everyone who had been dazzled by his youth and his confidence. As they reached the foyer, I moved. I didn't shuffle. I didn't drag my feet. I stepped forward with a powerful, deliberate stride. Wait, I said. The command was authoritative. The officers stopped. They turned Connor around to face me. I walked up to him until I was inches from his face. I could smell the fear on him. It smelled like sweat and stale champagne. Connor looked down at my cane. He expected me to hit him with it. He flinched, closing his eyes. But I didn't raise the cane. Instead, I leaned it against the hallway table. I stood up. I really stood up. I straightened my spine, uncurling the years of feigned weakness. I rolled my shoulders back, expanding my chest. I am 6'2". For 3 months, I had made myself look 5'8". But now I towered over him. Connor opened his eyes. He looked up at me, and his jaw dropped. He wasn't looking at a frail invalid. He was looking at a man made of iron and concrete. I wanted you to see me, Connor, I said, my voice deep and resonant, echoing off the marble floors. I wanted you to see the man you thought you could break. You were faking it, Connor stammered. The whole time. The dizziness. The memory loss. I leaned in closer. My eyes locked onto his. I wasn't faking the weakness, Connor. I was hiding the strength. Because a man like you doesn't understand strength unless it is used to crush something. You think power is money. You think power is a title. You think power is a house you didn't build. I gestured to the ballroom behind me, to the intricate woodwork I had carved, to the foundation I had poured. You looked at me and you saw a black man in a big house, and you assumed I was lucky. You assumed I was a relic. You assumed I was something to be swept aside. Connor swallowed hard. You did. I cut him off. You said it on the tape. You said I earned it so you could burn it. You thought I was just a stepping stone for your ambition. I took a deep breath, letting the anger fuel my words. But you forgot where I came from, son. I didn't inherit this. I didn't marry into this. I built this empire from the mud. I mixed the mortar with my own sweat. I fought banks that wouldn't lend to me. I fought inspectors who wanted to shut me down. I fought a world that told me I belonged in the basement, not the penthouse. I pointed a finger at his chest right over his heart. You evaluated my net worth, Connor, but you failed to evaluate my character. You underestimated a black man who has survived wars you couldn't even imagine. You thought you were a wolf in a sheep pen. But you walked into the den of a lion, and you tried to steal his cubs. Connor looked down. He couldn't meet my gaze. The truth was too bright, too heavy. I stepped back. I picked up my cane again, not because I needed it, but because it was mine. Get him out of my house, I said to the officers. The air needs to be cleared. The officers nodded. They gripped Connor's arms and began to drag him out. As he crossed the threshold, as the cold night air hit his face, Connor looked back one last time. He looked at Jasmine, who was standing by the stairs watching him with dry eyes. He looked at the house that would never be his. And he looked at me standing tall and unbroken in the center of my domain. I hope the cell is comfortable, Connor, I called out. It is a bit smaller than the master suite, but at least it is secure. The door slammed shut. The sound was final, like the closing of a coffin lid. Silence returned to the house. But it wasn't the awkward silence of the party. It was a cleansing silence. Sarah was led out next, weeping loudly, begging for a lawyer. I didn't even look at her. She was a footnote in the story, a parasite that had been removed. I turned to the room. The guests were still standing there, frozen. They looked at me with a mixture of awe and embarrassment. They didn't know what to say. They didn't know if they should apologize or leave. I walked over to the bar. I picked up the bottle of 40-year-old scotch that Connor had opened. I poured a small amount into a clean glass. I raised the glass to the room. To the truth, I said. A few people raised their glasses tentatively. To the truth, they murmured. Then I looked at Jasmine. She walked over to me. She took the glass from my hand and took a sip. Then she hugged me. She hugged me so tight I thought my ribs would crack. It is over, Dad, she whispered. They are gone. Yes, I said, stroking her hair. They are gone, and we are still here. I looked around the room at the wreckage of the party. The streamers, the spilled wine, the broken glass. It was a mess, but it was my mess, and I knew how to fix it. I was an architect after all. Rebuilding was what I did best. Go home, everyone, I said to the guests. The show is over. They began to file out quickly, quietly, leaving their half-eaten food and their unopened gifts. They wanted to distance themselves from the scandal. They wanted to go home and tell their friends about the night Silas Thorne stood up. As the last guest left, I instructed the security team to lock the gates. I wanted the world locked out. I wanted just us, just the family inside these walls. I walked to the window and watched the police cruisers fade into the distance, their sirens wailing like mourning songs for Connor's lost future. He was going to a place where there were no mimosas, no silk robes, and no easy marks. He was going to learn the hard way that the only thing you truly own in this life is your integrity, and he had sold his for a plane ticket he never got to use. I turned back to Jasmine. She was sitting on the stairs, taking off her heels. "Are you okay?" I asked. She looked up. Her makeup was smeared, but her eyes were clear. "I will be," she said. "I feel lighter." "That is the feeling of dropping a dead weight," I said. I sat down next to her. We sat in silence for a long time, listening to the house settle, listening to the absence of the enemy. "You know, Dad," she said softly, "you were terrifying tonight." I chuckled. "I was just being myself, honey." "No," she said, shaking her head. "You were bigger than yourself. When you stood up, you looked like a mountain." I put my arm around her. "A mountain only stands tall because it has deep roots, Jasmine. Never forget your roots, and never let anyone try to cut them down." We sat there on the stairs, the old man and the young woman, surrounded by the ruins of a betrayal, but built on a foundation of love. We had won. It had cost us our innocence, and it had broken our hearts, but we had won. And as the clock struck midnight, signaling the start of a new day, I knew that we would be okay. We were thorns, and thorns protect their own. The silence that followed the departure of the police cars was heavy, but it was not oppressive. It was the kind of silence that falls over a forest after a violent storm has passed. The air feels scrubbed clean. The dead branches have been torn down and the ground is littered with debris, but the roots are still holding fast. I stood by the window watching the last of the red taillights disappear around the bend of the driveway, and then I turned back to the room that had been the stage for the most difficult night of my life. Jasmine was sitting on the sofa. She had kicked off her high heels and curled her legs under her black gown. She looked small in the vast room surrounded by half-empty champagne glasses and abandoned appetizers. The adrenaline that had sustained her during the confrontation had drained away, leaving her pale and trembling. She wasn't shaking from fear anymore. She was shaking from the aftershock of truth. I walked over to the sideboard and picked up the pile of wedding proofs that Benny had printed for me. The glossy images of a happiness that never existed. I carried them over to the sofa and sat down next to her. The cushions sighed under my weight. "I am sorry, Dad," Jasmine whispered. She didn't look at me. She was staring at her hands, the hands that were no longer wearing a wedding ring. "You have nothing to be sorry for," I said softly. "I brought him here," she continued, her voice gaining a little strength but cracking with emotion. "I invited the wolf into the sheep pen, just like you said. I defended him. I turned against you. I let him treat you like a burden in your own house. How could I be so blind? How could I not see that he was a monster?" I placed the stack of photos on the coffee table. "Because monsters don't look like monsters, Jasmine," I said. "If they did, we would run away. They look like princes. They sound like poets. They study us. They find the cracks in our armor and they pour themselves in until we think they are the glue holding us together." I reached out and took her hand. It was cold. "You fell in love with a reflection, Jasmine. A reflection he created just for you. That doesn't make you stupid. It makes you human. And it makes you a person with a good heart who wants to see the good in others. Never apologize for having a good heart. Just learn to guard it better." She looked up at me then. Her eyes were swimming with tears. "He wanted to sell the house," she said. "He wanted to erase Mom." I looked around the room. I looked at the spot where the grandfather clock used to stand before he moved it. "He couldn't erase her," I said, "because a house isn't just wood and brick. It is the memory of the people who lived in it. And as long as we are here, he hasn't erased anything." I picked up the first photo from the stack. It was the one of them cutting the cake. Connor's hand was over hers, guiding the knife, a gesture of dominance disguised as romance. "I think it is time to do a little redecorating," I said. I stood up and walked over to the fireplace. The logs were still glowing embers from the fire Connor had insisted on lighting for atmosphere. I picked up the iron poker and stirred them until a flame licked up orange and hungry. Jasmine stood up. She picked up the stack of photos. She walked over to me. She took the photo from my hand. She looked at Connor's smiling face one last time. There was no hesitation in her movement, no lingering sentiment. She tossed the photo onto the grate. The paper curled instantly. The heat turned the glossy image black. Connor's smile bubbled and melted away, disappearing into smoke. Next, she threw in the photo of the first dance. Then the photo of the vows. We stood there side by side, feeding the fire with the evidence of a lie. With every picture that burned, the room seemed to get a little lighter. The smell of burning plastic was acrid, but to me it smelled like purification. Finally, there was only one photo left. The photo Benny had taken. The one with the reflection in the window. The text message. "Fish has bitten the hook." Jasmine held it. She looked at the text. "I am not a fish," she whispered. "No," I said. "You are a shark. You just didn't know how to swim in deep water yet. But you do now." She threw the photo into the heart of the fire. We watched it turn to ash. We watched the words burn. The hook was gone. The line was cut. Jasmine dusted off her hands. She took a deep breath. Her posture straightened. The slump of the victim was gone, replaced by the spine of a thorn. "So what happens now?" she asked. "The company, the stocks. Vance said you moved everything to a trust. Do we have to petition the board to get it back? Do I have to go back to being a junior associate?" I smiled. I walked over to the desk in the corner, the one Connor had tried to claim as his own. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a thick leather binder. It wasn't the fake binder I had shown Connor. It was the real corporate charter for Thorn Architecture. I walked back to her and held it out. The trust was a shield, Jasmine, I said. It was designed to protect the assets from a predator, but a shield can be lowered when the danger has passed. I opened the binder to the organizational chart. At the top was my name. Below it was the position of Chief Executive Officer. For 5 years, I have been waiting for you to be ready to take this chair, I said. I taught you how to read a blueprint. I taught you how to calculate a load-bearing wall. But there was one thing I couldn't teach you in a classroom. What is that? She asked, touching the page. I couldn't teach you how to spot a liar, I said. I couldn't teach you how to survive betrayal. I couldn't teach you that sometimes the person shaking your hand is holding a dagger behind their back. I looked her in the eye. In this business, Jasmine, people will try to cheat you. Contractors will cut corners. Developers will lie about zoning. Partners will try to steal your clients. You need to be tough. You need to be skeptical. And until tonight, I wasn't sure if you had that steel in you. I thought about the way she had blocked the door, the way she had dared Connor to hit her, the way she had looked him in the eye as the police dragged him away. But tonight, I said, placing my hand on the binder, tonight you didn't just survive. You fought back. You outsmarted a con man at his own game. You held the line. I took a pen from my pocket. I turned the page to the transfer of leadership. You learned the hard lesson, Jasmine. You paid the tuition with your heart. Don't let that pain go to waste. Use it. Let it make you sharper. Let it make you a better leader. I handed her the pen. The company is yours, I said. Not as a gift, but because you earned it. You helped me save it. Jasmine looked at the pen. She looked at the signature line. Are you sure, Dad? She asked. You are not retiring. You are strong. I am strong. I agreed. But I am an architect. I like to design. I like to draw. I don't like to fight lawyers and chase bad debts. That is a job for a CEO. That is a job for a warrior. I tapped the paper. Sign it. Take the chair. I will stay on as chairman emeritus. I will sit in the garden and prune the roses and criticize your designs. But the decisions, the power, that belongs to you now. Jasmine took the pen. Her hand was steady. She signed her name. Jasmine Thorne. She didn't sign Hilt. She signed Thorne. She closed the binder and held it to her chest. I won't let you down, she said. I know, I said. We walked to the kitchen. The catering staff had left a pot of coffee and some sandwiches. We were suddenly starving. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Connor had tried to force me to sign the guardianship papers. The ghost of that memory was already fading. We ate in companionable silence. You know, Jasmine said, biting into a sandwich, I think I am going to sell the apartment in the city. I think I want to live here for a while. If that is okay with you. I smiled. This house is too big for one old man, I said. And besides, I need someone to help me figure out how to work the new security system I installed. It is very complicated. She laughed. It was a real laugh. A little tired, but genuine. I think you know how to work it just fine, Dad. We finished our meal as the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows. The gray sky was turning a soft pink. The storm had passed. The wreckage was cleared. I stood up and walked to the back door, opening it to let in the morning air. It was cold and crisp. I looked out at the garden. The azaleas Connor had ordered to be dug up were still there. Mr. Henderson hadn't removed them. He had known better. I turned back to my daughter, the new CEO of Thorne Architecture. Come here, Jasmine, I said. Look at this. She came and stood beside me. The sun is coming up, I said. It is a new day, she said, resting her head on my shoulder. Yes, I said. It is. And the best part about a new day, Jasmine, is that we get to decide what to build with it. We stood there watching the sunrise, watching the light chase away the shadows of the long night. We were scarred, yes. We were wounded. But we were standing. And in the end, that is all that matters. The foundation held. The house survived. And the family was stronger than ever. The morning light hits the limestone columns of my porch with a softness that only comes after a long, dark storm. I am sitting in my favorite rocking chair, the one Bernice bought for me 30 years ago, and for the first time in months, the creak of the wood underneath me sounds like a lullaby rather than a warning. The house is quiet behind me. It is not the silence of an empty tomb, nor is it the silence of fear that Connor imposed upon us. It is the peaceful silence of a fortress that has successfully repelled an invasion. I hold a cup of black coffee in my hands, letting the warmth seep into my old bones. I watch the steam rise and disappear into the cool autumn air. Down in the garden, I can see Mr. Henderson. He came back this morning without being asked. He is down on his knees by the azaleas, his hands deep in the soil, carefully repairing the damage Connor caused. He does not look up, but I know he knows I am here. We do not need to speak. Loyalty does not need loud words. It shows itself in the dirt under your fingernails and the way you show up when the fair-weather friends have fled. Jasmine steps out onto the porch. She is wearing jeans and one of my old flannel shirts. She looks tired. The events of the last few days have etched new lines around her eyes, lines that make her look less like a girl and more like a woman who understands the cost of survival. She sits on the steps near my feet, leaning her head against the railing. We sit there for a long time, watching the sun climb higher. "You know, Dad," she says softly without looking back, "I used to think this house was just a pile of bricks. I used to think you were stubborn for holding on to it." I take a sip of coffee. "It is just bricks, Jasmine," I say, "until you bleed for it. Then it becomes ground, and you never give up your ground." She nods slowly. I understand that now. I look at her and I see the future of the Thorne family. She is bruised, yes, her heart is broken and her trust has been shattered. But as an architect, I know that the strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire. She will not be the same naive girl who married a man because he smiled nicely. She will be sharper, she will be wiser. She will look at a contract and see the traps before she signs. She will look at a suitor and see the shadow behind the charm. Connor wanted to break her, but he only succeeded in tempering her. I look out at the skyline of Chicago in the distance, the city I helped build. I think about the man I had to become to save us. I had to shrink myself. I had to dim my light. I had to let a mediocre man treat me like a child in my own kingdom. It was a humiliation that burned my pride every single day. But it taught me a lesson that I will carry to my grave. We spend so much time building fences to keep the enemy out. We install alarms. We lock our doors. But the most dangerous enemy is the one we invite in for dinner. The one we give a key to. The one we trust with our hearts. Connor did not break in. We opened the door for him. And that is the hardest truth to swallow. But we also threw him out. And that is the victory. I look at the garden again. The azaleas will bloom again next spring. They are resilient, just like us. Jasmine stands up and stretches. She looks at me with a small, sad smile. "I'm going to the office later," she says. "I have a meeting with the partners. I need to explain everything." You do not need to explain anything, I tell her. You just need to lead. Walk in there with your head high. You are the CEO of Thorne Architecture. You cleaned house. That is what leaders do. She kisses my cheek. "Thanks, Dad, for catching me when I fell." "I did not catch you, Jasmine," I say, patting her hand. "I just reminded you that you know how to fly." She goes back inside, and I'm left alone with my thoughts. I think about Bernice. I wonder what she would have said if she were here. She probably would have told me I was too dramatic with the video presentation, but she would have been proud. She would have been proud that we protected what we built. Legacy is a heavy word. People think it means money. They think it means leaving a big bank account or a trust fund. But money is just paper. Fire can burn it. Thieves can steal it. A fool can waste it. True legacy is what I see in my daughter's eyes this morning. It is the refusal to be a victim. It is the intelligence to outwit a predator. It is the courage to stand in front of a room full of people and own your truth. I close my eyes and listen to the wind in the trees. I am 72 years old. My knees ache when it rains, and my hands are not as steady as they used to be. But my mind is sharp, my spirit is unbroken, and my home is safe. I am Silas Thorne. I am a builder, and I know that as long as the foundation is good, the house will stand, no matter how hard the wind blows. In the end, I learned that betrayal never comes from your enemies. It always comes from those you invite into your sanctuary. True wealth isn't the numbers in your bank account or the mansion you sleep in. It's the wisdom to distinguish between those who love you for your soul and those who only love you for your shade. Protect your legacy not just for yourself, but for the generations that follow. Sometimes you have to play the fool to fool the fool who thinks they are fooling you. Stay awake. Stay strong. Reflecting on this journey, I realized that the most dangerous invaders are often the ones we invite to dinner. Connor saw my gray hair as a sign of decay, but he failed to understand that an old tree has the deepest roots. True legacy isn't about the assets you leave behind. It's about teaching your children how to survive the storm and how to distinguish between those who love the shade and those who love the tree. Never apologize for protecting your peace, and never let anyone convince you that your kindness is a weakness. Stay vigilant. If you have ever had to outsmart a wolf in sheep's clothing to protect your family, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice.